If everyone's ready, let us begin episode 3 of Just Your Average Gaming Podcast, where we're going to talk about the very fabric of games themselves, primarily gameplay and narrative. So yeah, I think we'll start. Everybody will kind of give their view on gameplay versus narrative and what it means and how you feel about it. And which is more important to you, and then we'll kind of dive in from there. Does anyone want to go first? Or shall I just pick someone?
I think the pressure's always nice. You should just pick someone.
All right,
Yeah, just pick. Let's go.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
All right.
Pick that nose.
So,
That's a real leader right there.
yeah. I was like, you know what? I'm ready. Let's just do it. So for me, it's an easy answer. It's narrative. I've always been more of a story-driven kind of guy. That's why I love RPGs so much, especially the old BioWare ones and things like what I'm playing now, The Witcher. Because yeah, for me, it's the reason I play games is to not just experience stories, because there's other ways to experience stories, obviously, with movies and books. But for me, what puts it apart is the interactivity and the player agency. I love having a big epic story where I'm not just, observing it. I am an active part of it. And for me, that is, to me, always been the greatest part of games. And that's, for me, why narrative is always more important for me. If I have a game on one hand that has great gameplay but a weak story, or another game with a great story but kind of meh gameplay, I'll always play the one with the better story, no matter how good the gameplay is in the other one. But ultimately, the best games are the ones that do both really well, but most games don't accomplish that. So there's my spiel.
Good spiel.
Wait. I just want to know: are we talking like subjectively, our own perspectives of what we prefer, or
yeah? Well, to start, yeah, just kind of give your how you feel about it personally, not like necessarily what what science says, if you will, but like what you prefer.
Well, I nabbed the
why?
That will be quickest.
Yeah.
Oh, just for our okay.
Then we'll get into the more like nitty gritty after. This is kind of just all of us putting our money where our mouth is, like
Putting our 2 cents.
Yeah, this is where we stand going.
Please,
Okay, because that puts me in a
look there. Towards the wall.
that puts me in a strange position. Just because I guess I'll go next, just to explain what I mean. Is that personally I play games for primarily the story. Like, that is why I will play a game. And I really like to, like you said, it's just having the agency, but also I obviously enjoy the gameplay aspect of playing games. I think we would all agree to that. But there's something about the pacing of a game. It's a story told over a really long period of time, and you can't obviously have consistent storytelling at every moment. And the gameplay is the one thing that is consistent throughout the game. So you're always playing, and the narrative will show up every now and then to keep things moving and to keep you motivated. And I think that when the narrative takes a big dip is when the gameplay needs to keep things afloat, and vice versa. So if the narrative, if the gameplay is not really there, the narrative is taking front and center. If the narrative kind of goes in the background, the gameplay needs to be the thing that's strong. But at the end of the day, you have so many abstract games that have no narrative, where yeah, you can build one yourself, but at the end of the day, you're basically, if you're playing Tetris, there's no story, but it could be a lot of fun. But at the end of the day, all I'm trying to say is I love narrative in games, in RPGs, in even visual novels, what have you. But I think objectively, gameplay is priority, and subjectively, for me, narrative takes priority. That's where I stand.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty fair way to look at it, to be honest. I'm kind of along somewhat similar opinions, where I do agree that that bad gameplay can really break a game, whereas having a bad story, as long as the gameplay supports it, you could still kind of squeeze by. But at least in my personal experience, I've always thoroughly enjoyed games with a hard story, and I will totally overlook gameplay. We talk about Knights of the Old Republic 1. Looking back on it now, it's a very janky system. The gameplay itself, it's still the early days of 3D turn-based and whatnot, but that story will forever bring me back in. And I once again, I totally agree. Gameplay is important. It's how we got the medium in the first place, if it was just a visual novel, it'd be a different category entirely. But I feel like its story, especially in recent years, that has really elevated gaming from just being a thing that you do to more of an art form. And that's my 2 cents.
I guess I come in with a bit of a split perspective, where myself, in my heart of hearts, I need a good story to keep me going into a video game. But where I stand on that question of story versus gameplay is king. Bad gameplay can only get you so far, and a good story, if what I want is to experience a good, proper story, I'll open a book and read a book, or watch a movie, or watch a TV show, or anything else. The main appeal of video games is their interactivity, and you don't really interact with a story much. You guide it a little bit, but the bulk of the happenings of a story, the bulk of the key beats, are elements that are completely outside of your control for the most part. So for me, content is king and gameplay is king.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Should we debate, or what would you like to do with our information we've gathered here?
Well, one thing I can say, Louis, I think you're underselling how much impact certain games allow you to have in a story, and how much you can weave the game's experience through your own actions in other ways. Because yeah, sure, I could just read a book, but I don't want to, because I want to be a part of the story. And the best games are the ones that really let you do that. Unless, of course, there are games that aren't meant to do that. I'm not trying to be a part of the story when I'm playing Rocket League. That's just for fun.
Of
We're
course.
talking about the best games. Make games is that.
I mean, yeah, no, you can look at the Mass Effect series for examples for that. Whereas they try to make an emphasis on story and gameplay are both balanced, but when you really come down to it, I didn't play Mass Effect for the gameplay. I played it because I was able to have an impact on the story, or at least the perceived impact on a story. But we'll save that for the Mass Effect podcast.
Mass Effect is definitely an interesting case study, because ultimately I think the answer to that question is gonna vary a lot from genre to genre, if not from game to game, which is why in the beginning, when we were discussing even doing that subject, I came in with the very strong opinion of that question is a non-question, and the answer is never going to be satisfying to anyone. But for the sake of debate and for the sake of defending my own personal biases, I choose to side with gameplay, because ultimately a game's gameplay can keep me going longer than a game's story. I've let go of games with great stories because the gameplay wasn't engaging enough. But I always got to the end of games with cool gameplay because cool gameplay is the reason I game, I guess.
Well, yeah, I think that if you're playing a game, games are rarely going to try to be very short experiences. I think it's that's a rare experience you're going to see. So usually you're thinking maybe it's going to be several hours. It usually is maybe 3 or 4 times at least the size of a feature film. And most of that, the bulk of that, is the gameplay, not the narrative. For the most part. Obviously, there's exceptions.
Games that play in short bursts are usually games that are meant to be started over and over. Something like Tetris. Like a game of Tetris, I'm an avid player of Tetris, and a good game can take you 20 minutes, half an hour, depending on how good a score you manage to get and what version you're playing on. But ultimately, the game's going to reach its end, and the expected outcome is that you either keep going trying to beat your high score or move on and play something else. But ultimately, there's always, or even something like Dark Souls, there's always this intention of playing in shorter bursts but starting over. Because ultimately, someone who's very proficient with a game like Dark Souls can get it over with like pretty quickly. But there's always something more to challenge because the game has this intrinsic mechanic of getting harder. So ultimately, the game keeps you drawn in, not by default of having an engaging story, but by default of just proposing an idea of gameplay that's just like, well, you finished this game that was this level of difficulty. How about you try similar things, but harder and harder and harder? And that's how the game's going to keep you going. It's going to keep you going through its gameplay. Now, games like what you're playing now, The Witcher, like, of course, you get to the end of a game like The Witcher because gameplay is definitely very neat, but the story is incredibly rich. I can't fault good games. I can't fault good games for good stories, but ultimately, if I have to choose, gameplay wins.
I think that I agree with what you're saying in the end, which is that I would agree that narrative is almost like the seasoning or the marinade of the food of the game food, if you will, like that. Basically, to say that you're playing a game, and any game that you could think of without a story or with a bad story, that's really fun, could always be made even more fun if it had a good story and good writing. And I think that a great example of that idea is when you think of roguelikes. Usually roguelikes, narrative will take a little bit of a backseat. So if you think of like Binding of Isaac or something like that, or Rogue Legacy, there's a narrative, there's writing, but it's kind of it's not at the forefront. But then you look at something like Hades, where like the narrative is really intertwined. Every time you
Hades
pick up
is a gem.
Exactly, and I think that Hades is a really good example of how, yeah, you could have had Hades, and Hades would be a lot of fun if you took out all the characters and writing. It would still be very fun.
Hey folks,
but think about how much depth that adds to it, how much more engaging the game is because of all these characters and writing. It elevates it, and I think that that's what narrative does. It elevates games. If even as far back as NES games that didn't have the technology to display a strong story, they'd come with manuals to
a few lines of text just to guide your head as to what might be going on.
Exactly, that's exactly it. It's flavor.
Because ultimately, like the whole idea, like even if you look at games, like forget the video part of it for a second. Is there a story to Monopoly?
I guess you kind of create one in your head. There's kind of a meta.
There's a whole spiel about how it's about the fall of capitalism and whatever. But ultimately, like the story is what you make it out to be. In a game like Clue, Clue's fun is figuring out what happened, and you kind of craft the story as you go along, gathering clues. But ultimately, the story is whatever happens in your head. The game doesn't explicitly tell you backstories for each character or for each weapon and what everybody was doing here. And no, they just pin people in rooms and then you ask questions. So the whole notion that a game had to have a story kind of developed as our means to produce games developed. When we went beyond simple games, simple child's play, and moved on to something that had more artistic liberties. For a game to reach the pinnacle of what gaming can be and what video games can be, yes, they'll need good story. But for a video game to be fun, or as much fun as a specific genre can give, not necessarily. I'd even say that some genres make very difficult the addition of story, namely puzzle games, which become a real headache when they start trying to incorporate stories. Although some games have done it beautifully, like Catherine.
Oh yeah, that was the words out of my mouth.
Yeah, it's one of my. It's not one of my. Talos Principle is another good one. Portals. It's certainly like there are gems that manage to do it, but ultimately a game like Portal, the story is nice, but figuring out the puzzle, that aha moment, is infinitely better.
That's what it is. It's just that's the game. The narrative is like it's like something you're placing on top of the game.
Yeah, I like to conceive of the narrative as a bit of an engine. It's gonna help you keep things going when you sometimes wouldn't, and it's gonna keep players who don't necessarily feel the need to challenge themselves going by offering them the simple challenge of just figure out what the story is, just see it through. It's
Yeah,
a very
motivation.
natural progression of, well, you started something that had characters that had engaging moments or engaging people, and you might as well just see it through. Final Fantasy 13 is one of them where I liked the writing, I liked a lot of the characters, maybe not as much as I did other games, but it was by that the gameplay wasn't good enough to keep me going if it wasn't for how invested I was in the story.
I think we've all been there. Yeah, like being dragged through bad gameplay because you're like, oh, but I have to see what happens.
Yeah.
These characters, I have to see this through. And I think that's the sign of good writing and good narrative. If it pushes you enough through the gameplay. But I honestly, on the spot, I honestly can't think of many games many examples of that. I guarantee you I've done it 100 times, but I can't even think of one example right now.
I don't know if it's necessarily the best example, but like for me, at the top of The Witcher, The Witcher 1 can be a bit of a slog to play. There's a lot of running back and forth and stuff, and like. But for me, I was so invested in the story that I didn't care that I was getting, feeling tedious with the combat.
I can give an example. I think I have an example that Dan will relate to. Pokemon. Pokemon is one of those games that offers very little to no compelling story to see to the end, and yet every time I pick the game up, if I'm picking it up from scratch, obviously, if I'm picking it up, I'm gonna see it through, just because the gameplay, the fundamental gameplay it's a thing of legend at this point. Like, I don't think I need to sing the praises of a game like Pokemon for people to understand the monster that it's become.
It's a good thing to bring up too, and also just kind of shows where I'm at, because maybe that's part of why I never really ever got super into Pokemon when I was younger.
Pokemon's definitely one of those things that I feel like, as it is now in the state of the world now, it rides a lot on the nostalgia factor of old beats like me that played really young and couldn't even understand that there was a story being told. I was just going through the motion of getting cool Pokemons in my team, like.
Yeah, 100%.
I was a poor French kid that spoke no English, so the story was going above my head whether I wanted it or not. Like,
They don't have Pokemon like French versions?
no, or at least not that I got my hands on.
Okay. Well, thankfully, I don't think the writing maybe isn't as vital to playing
No,
the game, right?
it's definitely not, which is definitely when I finally got to reading it and figuring out what the story was and saw that it was a direct parallel to what was going on in the anime, I was like, okay, well, I didn't miss that much, I guess.
No, absolutely not. And I honestly, just for a moment to talk about Pokemon, I maybe have a bit of a controversial opinion. I've enjoyed a couple of Pokemon games, but I find that like both gameplay and narrative feel kind of weak to me because I feel it's too similar. I know they have different Pokemon in each game and getting different teams is fun, but I feel like I played at least 2 of them completely through and done a lot in them. And I was after that I was like, I can't. Every time they release a new one, I'm like, I just don't know what there is in this that's gonna make me want to play the whole thing again. I just can only do it so many times, the same formula of gameplay and narrative. It's because the narrative also doesn't shift enough. Sometimes they try something new.
Barely shifts at all, yeah.
Yeah, but it's the rival, the bad guy team blank, and Professor blank, and for 3 starters.
It's Professor Tree, and then.
Yep. Professor Tree, evil team, legendary Pokemon, 3 starters, fire, water, and grass, and then...
Yeah, I mean, there's gameplay reasons for why those starters are always those.
Yes, of course.
But even beyond that, it's true that Pokemon is by far one of the most... A few exceptions or a few comparisons come to mind, but it's definitely one of the most formulaic games out there.
Yeah, I get it. It works. You'll buy it. But it kills me. Like, I can't do it. As much as I wanted, like, we just had the Pokemon Direct, and I watched some gameplay, and I saw that they're remaking Diamond and Pearl, and people are really happy about this.
Yeah.
Diamond and Pearl was actually my first Pokemon that I played through the whole way.
Oh wow,
nice.
And,
okay.
Which is a bit late, I know, compared to like the first 3 gens, but I played that one all the way through, and it was my first experience, and I really enjoyed it. And then I played X and Y after. And then I played a bit of Omega Ruby, and in Omega Ruby I was like, I can't. Like, it's just the exact same thing again. And I lacked the motivation, and I think that that's interesting. We're talking about narrative and gameplay, and I'm wondering what in either would have motivated me, because narrative in Ruby and Sapphire was a little more engaging because your dad is actually in the game, which I found was a crazy change of events.
It was an unforeseen circumstance for sure.
Yeah, that's a difference, but I feel like it wasn't enough. And same with the gameplay. I was thinking, well, what can they introduce here that's gonna make me want to keep going? What feature will they add? And gameplay wasn't there. Narrative wasn't there. All right, well, I'm just sort of throwing it back. Like I can't, unless I force myself, I can't really play Pokemon.
And that's often the worst scenarios when you have to force yourself to play a game. Like, why are you doing it?
It's the beginning of the end. When you start feeling like I have to rather than I want to, that's the beginning of the end right there.
Yeah.
I feel that sometimes that has kind of worked in my favor. Like I forced myself to start The Witcher 1, and at a certain point it did become enjoyable, and I started playing it because I liked it. But there's always, especially with older games, games that have been dated in terms of controls or in visuals, there's a bit of a hump where I kind of forced myself to try and get the hang of it, and then once I do, I'll either stick with it or give up. But I feel like the beginning is usually a part where I have to push to enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Well,
you gotta get over the hump.
Yeah, exactly. Pokemon's in a weird place nowadays because obviously it was very innovative back in the day, and it survived. I mean, I'll be the first to admit it survived entirely on its gameplay. Story was never a big thing with Pokemon games. I just feel like now they're kind of falling into that same trap that people who play Call of Duty or who buy the new Battlefield. Like we've seen, especially a lot in recent years, story taking a back seat to just not even gameplay innovation, but just like more of the same.
More of the same, yeah.
You know.
But you know, one thing I'm thinking about as you're mentioning this is I remember of a few games that tried to break the mold, like Mega Man. Mega Man was a game that tried to break its own mold, and people only flamed it for it. So I can't really blame the big studios that have these like key franchises to stick to their guns with what works. But at some point, there's something to be lost in doing that over and over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm trying to quickly math out how many Mega Man games are even out there, and I'm gonna stop at 30, but there's more.
Yeah, exactly.
So many more.
Like just in original Mega, they're at 11, and then you add the X, which goes all the way to X8, so that's 19 games right there just for the two like mainstream franchises of Mega Man.
Network transmission and
I'm omitting completely Battle Network. I'm omitting Mega Man Zero. I'm omitting Mega Man Legends. I'm omitting some Game Boy remakes that exist, like Mega Man Extreme. And,
Legends, yeah.
And that's without counting all the Legacy Collector Editions and
There's quite a few. There's quite a few Mega Man.
Definitely a few, but they had a formula that worked and that people wanted more of, which is why they could just engage in this mindless pumping out games the same way Assassin's Creed's been doing in the modern year, where it's like a lot of those games feel kind of samey. There's a bit of a nuance, a bit of a difference here and there, but ultimately it's just new assassins in new areas and you just go and kill people.
Okay, here's the thing. When we're talking about Mega Man, if I'm going to compare Mega Man to Pokemon, gameplay-wise, yeah, it's the same structure in every game, so yeah, I get where you're coming from. But I think that the fact that the powers are different, and the powers are not an aesthetic thing, whereas in Pokemon, they're more of like an aesthetic and a number, whereas in Mega Man, because it's an instant action platformer, they actually have a much more dynamic impact on the gameplay.
You made a mistake there. The thing about Pokemon's gameplay is that there's a lot of hidden depth to it. There's so many mechanics, and Dan can probably assist me with that because he's probably more knowledgeable than even I am.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of deep mechanics that are really hidden to the player and aren't designed to help you finish the game in any way, shape, or form. At this point, it's the difference between what makes a casual Pokemon player and a professional. Things like IV breeding and like all of the EV training and the depth through which you can push the game just to really craft if I can use the word, very customized, very thought out Pokemons. It's definitely got some depth to it that on the surface, because a lot of those statistics are invisible to the player, on the surface it's going to look a lot more simple than what's actually running in the background. But I don't know that that alone is enough to call Pokemon a really like intense, innovative gameplay experience.
It's just that at the bottom line, even those changes, the EV training and all that changes is under the hood numbers. I guess you could say that about anything, but it's more because it's a turn-based battle system. It really comes down to like the strategies come down to there's not enough new types of moves. It's just you're basically either buffing, debuffing, attacking, critting. There's like a certain limit to what those moves are, and yeah, you can play with the stats by breeding, and there is a depth there. I believe that. But when I'm thinking of an action platformer, which is a completely different genre, of course, I feel like you could, even if you took away Mega Man's powers completely, he has no guns, no abilities, just the sheer number of variations on platforming levels you could make for him with his jumping abilities is really broad. Like, you can make tons of different platforming levels.
Yeah, especially if you start introducing some of the mechanics like jumping, the dash jumping and upward dashing and
jumping off walls, or you add in like moving platforms, platforms that can freeze. You just throw in anything, and you could just look at how many platforming retro games there are on Steam, and you can see that platforming by itself is something that's there's infinite variations. They're dynamic and interesting. Whereas turn-based combat, I think you need to have a set structure to make keep it dynamic, because there are, like, if you compare Final Fantasy to Pokemon, obviously there's differences. You don't get to keep the creatures you're killing, at least not in every version of it. I don't know if there's a version where you can capture. There you go. Yeah. So you can capture. Having that ability is interesting, of course, but also just being a fighter is interesting. But there's only so many times you can do the exact same system, in my opinion, and keep it engaging.
The thing about something like Pokemon is that it's very much like a game of chess. Whoever gets to play first, whoever gets to open, is usually considered on the offensive, and then whoever plays second is usually considered on the defensive, unless through clever gameplay you manage to flip the board around and gain the advantage. But Pokemon really appeals to that chess game aesthetic where, yeah, the moves kind of feel samey because there's only so many ways you can push a pawn, kind of thing. But in the end, it's the whole element of, but can you see the whole battle through? Like, me, Dan, and a couple of our other friends used to make these big singular type battles just to push the limits of what we could do with Pokemon. And just seeing the wide variance of who beat who and who got beat how, what was enough to provide a lot of insight that there's actually an interesting system behind this. I just don't know that the game and its story is enough to drive people to keep playing, other than die-hard fans that are amateurs of this whole dueling paradigm.
Well, the thing is that whole aspect of the game that you love so much is usually not in the front seat when you're playing the game for its story, or like its main modes, because they don't have it's meant to be approachable to children. And they don't let it get that deep. If you want to go that deep, you need to do multiplayer. And I feel that any game with a deep enough system, you add multiplayer, and then it becomes like, you can look at Smash, for example, and it becomes replayable for pretty much forever.
Yep.
But for its just single player, I don't think it ever really pushes you to figure that out. If you grind enough your starters and you get a legendary, I mean, you just kind of plow through everything.
Yeah, I'm kind of forced to agree on that one.
Yeah, 100%. Like they certainly, like you said, kind of make it. They try to make it more kid friendly. They try to hide a lot of those.
Although, one thing I will say to kind of nuance that just a little bit is that the more recent Pokemon games added this post-game paradigm of like either the Battle Maison or the Battle Tree, or they always had this dueling area that really got you to push your teams hard to go as far as you could, and that was a very welcome addition. Whether or not it's enough to salvage a game that's been losing speed over the past few years, I don't know, but it's certainly something interesting that they brought forward, and I'm curious to see where they're gonna take it next. Now that they have this new open world game announced.
On that note, and just to kind of bring it back to the subject at hand, do you feel like Pokemon? Do you think it's going to take a gameplay innovation or basically an injection of like mainline story to revive the Pokemon setting?
He's my friend.
I don't think there is such a thing as reviving a dying setting, unfortunately. Some things are better off left to die, unfortunately.
And I can tell you as the one person who loved Pokemon, but like out of us, the least played Pokemon player,
Yes, Geralt.
like yeah,
It's
I'm interested
me.
in this, Breath of the Pokemon,
Regis?
but it's not like
You
I don't
alright?
think I'm going to suddenly like fall head
All
over
is
heel
well.
for Pokemon.
All's
you
in
know?
order.
It still
Wounds
is
such
what
as
it
these
is.
heal on vampires in moments.
And it'll
Yeah,
always
the
be what it is.
fundamentals
It tries
are gonna
not to be,
stay the
then it'll
same.
lose its only
Least a
actual
human
fan
turns out
base if it
How's
tries
this
to
even
change too much,
possible?
because
Last I saw
Pokemon,
you,
among many
I was
many
a
other things, but
bubbling,
especially Pokemon,
shapeless
relies so
smear,
much on
having
nostalgia.
been
you
rather
know?
spectacularly melted.
Yeah.
You see so many.
I
most
feel
people-
like
most people our age
Nintendo-
who played it when 20 years ago.
Before,
you know?
mind you, but were I human?
Nintendo in general has a
I'm
huge
sorry. What happened
problem on
was
its
my
hand,
fault.
where a lot of its core franchises are facing a bit of a midlife crisis,
Bygones.
where you can reinvent the gameplay of Mario only so many times before people start asking, yeah, okay, but what next?
Yeah,
I think they answered that question quite well, though. Mario,
What's that?
specifically. I just think that Mario answer like they handle it quite well. Mario and Zelda
Yeah.
specifically innovate like it's no one's business. Like every game comes out, they're like, well, he went into space. How many more things can he do? And they're like, well, I don't know. Maybe he'll throw his hat at everything and become that.
Yeah,
We're like,
exactly.
"Hey,
Miraculous
sure."
regeneration. How do you manage it? I had help from the one you
That
want.
works.
Him? How? And what have you been doing all these years? Not the time, nor
I think
place
recently
for
with
such
Nintendo,
stories.
we saw something that they did that almost kind of favors story versus gameplay thing. Has anyone played the Paper Mario games in general?
I've played the second and third ones.
Okay, so Thousand Year Door and the Wii one, I guess.
So you
Super
mean-
Paper Mario.
It's not
Okay,
all
cool.
A bit of the DS one,
Your
the 3DS.
Oh,
Right,
right, yeah, the Sticker Star. Yeah, that one I completely missed because I
came here for
heard.
Dettlaff.
You didn't miss much.
No, that's
Landed himself.
that's the general
And
consent.
that's why he didn't play.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this year they came out with another Paper Mario, the Origami
Though
King,
Dettlaff is
and I played through it, and you know,
bestial than I am.
I gotta say, if it wasn't for the story, I would have put it down in the first hour.
Haven't exactly done a
They-
Oh, that bad,
Yep.
huh?
Yeah,
killed one guy since
I
got
feel
him.
like by
Three others before
quote
I
unquote
left.
innovating the gameplay so much, they've drifted way too far from what people have enjoyed about those games, which, at least from what I'm gathering online and my own personal experience, had been the story. The gameplay itself in One and Thousand Year Door was essentially the same, but people will always look to Thousand Year Door because the story was just that much more rich.
Super Mario RPG.
That was the first one. baby.
Pinnacle of storytelling with Mario.
Oh yeah, 100%. They've never since and beforehand they had never given Mario or any of those characters nearly as much personality.
I think that they're just the problem with the Paper Mario series is that they're innovating, but they're not leaning into what they should be. I'm trying to word that they're not leaning into its own identity. They're looking out. It's like they're leaning away from it into new directions. When really, if they just embrace their own identity and innovate with that, that's where they should be looking to for development. Like in Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, and how it's a development over Paper Mario, and how they improve Paper Mario's core elements in terms of gameplay. I'm speaking about. Even over Mario RPG on the Super Nintendo, the differences are how they make the battles feel more dynamic and engaging, and they play into that whole theater, like the children's school play kind of thing. And that it has such a unique flavor and personality, like having the audience boo you or like throw things at you. But for me, I think the crux of it, and I think this is where I think even Origami King and Color Splash really lose it, is that the thing that made Paper Mario so much fun for me is, and even the Mario and Luigi series, is that even though it's turn-based, which is typically a genre about you losing control, you just pick options and watch it happen, you're engaged in mini games during your character's attacks, and for me, that's the winning formula. It's that you're always playing. You're never just sitting back. You choose an attack, and you play a mini game with that attack. And the better you are at that mini game, the more damage you do. And then on the receiving end of an attack, you don't just stand there and take the hit. You get to kind of reduce the damage based off of how good your reception is or your minigame skill is. That is the fun part for me. And taking that away and adding that ring system, I just feel like that's not quite what I was looking for. That's not what I look for in the gameplay aspect.
Yeah, even back in the day with Super Mario RPG, battles felt so dynamic because there was always this notion of you're either, if you're using some of your powers, you're going to be mashing, you're going to be looking for key timings. If you're doing the Ultra Jump Challenge, like, doing those 100 Ultra Jumps was insanely difficult and required a lot of precision, and there was always something to keep you engaged into what is essentially a very basic battle system. The turn-based attack-defend magic system is proven, like, since days of old, and they found a way to keep that system really engaging, and that's a huge props I have to give to Square and to whatever other companies contributed to the Paper Mario games.
Do you know what that means to a vampire? The gravity of the endeavor?
Yeah, I feel like what they should have been doing in terms of innovation, especially for those games, is don't innovate the gameplay so much. Like you were saying, Julian, lean into your identity, and then just find a way to make it interesting. You know, if they had focused more on story and just kind of kept the similar turn-based battle system where you have partners and they have unique abilities and unique personalities and such, just kind of. And it is, I will admit, it's a dangerous hole to fall into, because you don't want to just keep doing the same thing over and over, because then you fall into a terrible little cycle of repetition. But, you know, take what you have and run with it.
Killing egregiously.
Like, basically. To a certain extent, I can understand that studios don't want to just, like, pander to their audience, and they want to be able to test their limits and stretch their wings. But it comes to a point where they kind of owe it to their fans to give them something that's fresh without being mold breaking or too far away from what got them where they are. Because people will develop these expectations regardless of whether they try to manage them or not. You're kind of stuck in that cycle of expectations, and more often than not, studios are going to either play it too safe or too wild, and I find both of these approaches can be terribly toxic, both for the studio itself and for the industry, because you'll start seeing entire years of release that are just clogged with titles that are just iterations on things that have been done, or to the contrary, there's going to be these releases that are so far away from what they used to be that the fan base just can't relate to what's been put forward and just drops the game.
Mm-hmm.
I'm struggling to think of an example, but I had one.
Well, one example, like, I mean, I don't know if it's as extreme as what you're referring to, but you could look at Assassin's Creed that way.
Yes, that is definitely one.
The last 3 Assassin's Creeds are completely different gameplay-wise than the original games. And story-wise, they're held together by a thread at best.
Yeah.
And
present day,
what they've put forward is still like a great, at least for me, a great game. And a lot of it, because, you know, I can tell they're trying to make the next Witcher, and none of the 3 are as good as the Witcher, but, you know, everyone gets a little bit closer. But obviously, you can understand why people who love the stealth aspects, the actual assassin part of Assassin's Creed, and I can understand too with a game called Assassin's Creed, you get this, and it's like. Okay.
This is not,
It's brand power.
Origins, at least, you know, was still kind of there, still had it, but like all 3 had the problem of, you know, you You have like health pools now. You know you couldn't just one shot anybody because it's just not how the game systems are built anymore. You can get close, and you can like one-shot
and
easy
that's
enemies,
something
but-
that I see a lot more and more. It's that studios try this thing where everything is an RPG now. Everything has some form or another
because
of
RPG
leveling
is such a
up.
big buzzword. It gets
Yeah.
our panties in a bunch, if you know what I mean. You know? Like,
Yeah, oh yeah. I
Especially when it's
have
like a
very
new
strong
developer.
opinions about what is and isn't an RPG because I find that the term has been slandered so much that
yeah,
it's just
it's
like
watered down immensely.
everything from your grandma's TV show to whatever is an RPG now.
Some set of things that
And
will
I
really
think
set
that
him off.
that's a little bit far. Like,
How should I say this?
and I think this is a little off topic, but there are certain elements that used to make RPGs what they are that are absent from a lot of modern quote-unquote RPGs. And I think that it's a nice subject for another day, perhaps.
Yeah.
But
Maybe next week.
Suggesting he's
who knows?
maladjusted.
Who knows? Stay tuned, peeps. Stay tuned.
I'm suggesting
But,
maladjustment can at times be
Yeah, I think ultimately
But is it the case this
gameplay, if a franchise can't innovate on its gameplay enough, it's gonna stall, it's gonna stagnate, and it's gonna lose interest. And on the other hand, if it tries to improve too much,
we share a
it's
goal.
gonna alienate a lot of its fan base, and it could, depending on how well the changes are received, it could be good, it could be bad. It's definitely a gamble that's sometimes worth taking, sometimes not, but it's definitely a risky gamble.
By the time
I think
we do,
the problem is
I
though,
hope I'll have
a
convinced
lot of
you
game
Detlef is
developers
no
come out
monster.
and
Fine.
say, yeah, we're
alright
going to
already.
change things, make
But
it
for
better,
now,
but a lot of the
evidence
times
is
it's
stacking
just
up against him.
ultimately removing features from the previous
possible.
game in the
Knights
century,
must have tracked me
in
here.
the
I
series. You
prefer
know,
they
like,
not find me here.
you know, look
Andromeda.
at the Elder
Quarters
Scrolls.
at Mère
You
Lachaise
just
Long
go,
Cemetery.
you know, from
We'll
the
be
first
there.
to the fifth, you can see the degradation of
Oh, yeah.
RPG elements all the way through in the name of innovation, I guess. But then, is it really in the name of innovation, or are they just saying that and then, you know, putting the resources into graphics and other things?
Yeah.
It's Mass Effect as well, though. For Mass Effect 1 to Andromeda, if you see like the transition from a third-person RPG with shooting mechanics
Still
to
investigating.
over-the-shoulder Gears of War style shooter
Yeah.
to
Withdraw your men
full-blown
before I
action
trample
in
over the
Andromeda.
evidence.
Yeah.
Sus!
And you know,
must let the Witcher do
it's not
his
necessarily
work.
that Andromeda's combat's
Milton's
worse,
murder
but like,
cannot
it
go
does. It
unaffected.
is, you know, even within the main three, like just from 1 to 2, you know, there's a big difference
Yeah.
in how a lot of the mechanics work, and a lot of it's streamlined. But 2 has the benefit of, you know, everything else being so great that you're willing to overlook it. But when a game like, you know, Fallout 4 does it, and then the things that they've, you know, put their
Oh,
resources
boy.
to just kind of don't work, you know, then you're like, okay, what was the point of this innovation? You know, that's a point. You know, as much as I'm like, yeah, I'm the narrative guy. Like, you know, Fallout, you got to stay away from it. Bethesda, it's not your thing. You know, and like, but what's great about, you know, why I can still argue for the narrative in those games, it's the narrative you put into it. It's a lot like Dungeons and Dragons in that way. They're just
Yeah.
providing the playground. And then when they started restricting the playground to tell their own story that kind of, you know, wasn't very interesting, then it's like, oh, okay, maybe you shouldn't do that, you know? And then, you know, it goes back to what we're saying, like, ultimately gameplay and narrative, it's, you know, it's genre to genre, and then even game to game, you know? Like, I play the Elder Scrolls for, you know, its gameplay and its exploration, not for its story. Same with Fallout, although Fallout New Vegas did a really good job with that. And if they could do both, all the better. But Bethesda can't, or hasn't proven to be able to. Obsidian
Yeah, and
did it,
seeing
but
the
then-
legal trouble they're into now, I don't know when we'll get a chance to see if they can actually manage a good gameplay and story combined.
It'll be very interesting to see, you know, Starfield, whenever it becomes a thing, you know, what route they went with that, you know, like how does that play out? Is it going to be
I'm
more
very
action,
curious.
more RPG,
I'm
more
definitely-
story, more gameplay? Like, are they going to backtrack from what they did in Fallout, or are they going to try and like go whole hog at it? And then you can think, okay, well, they're innovating for the sake of a narrative, but in that case, like, no, you are what you are. And that's the best part, is like you can find games that are both super narrative good and super gameplay good, and you're allowed to like both, and both can be really good. But like, I love narrative in games, but I hate when games, you know, destroy what they were for the sake of a narrative. I never want that. Because even if the narrative's good, it's still going to leave like a sour taste in your mouth, you know? Like, but then when the narrative's bad on top of it, you're just like, well, that wasn't even, what did you even do it for, you know?
Yeah, that's just a game falling flat. I think that's just trying something new but failing, which I also think is necessary. Because we're talking about all these games that become formulaic and they work. And yeah, I mean, if they made another game, let's say CD Projekt Red made another game in the Witcher 3 world, or in the Witcher world, and it was the same as the Witcher 3 in almost every way, it's like, they could still tell a really good story, but it'd feel kind of shallow, because you've already seen a lot of these mechanics. And if they just kept doing that every year, you'd start wondering, like, nothing would really change. You need there to be those people who try something a little risky, kind of like Dark Souls, like we talked about last week, who open up the door to a new genre and a new experience, and then other people riff on that, you know. And we have games like Neo or The Surge that try to take that into another direction.
Capture
Sometimes
that
it fails.
lightning in a bottle.
Well, it's funny that you say that in relation to The Witcher, because they did, like, they made the Thronebreaker. You know, that's another game set in the same universe but with a completely different gameplay mechanic, you know. But it still was focused on the narrative. And it worked because they innovated sort of, but more like a spin-off than anything. But they managed, you know, to, you know, if they're able to do that more times, then yeah, it's going to work. But even so, like, man, I would play another 1,000 hours of Witcher 3 content if it existed. So that's just me.
Mm-hmm.
But I know what you mean for other games. Like, yeah, you can't just keep going without changing something, because eventually it will get stale.
I mean, they could still make money on it. I mean, like we said with Pokemon, or even like Call of Duty is not innovating tremendously. I think that Titanfall, to me, is the natural progression of Call of Duty. That's a game that
definitely
takes a shooter and adds this new layer to it.
Cranks it to max, and then just
that's what games need to do to innovate. They need to take things to the next level, and it's okay if Call of Duty never does. It has its player base, fine. Like, people are happy with it. That's good. But the thing that what Titanfall did in innovating gameplay, that needs to. I feel like every genre needs that to happen. Like this, like whole reckoning, this whole apocalyptic event that causes like a new genre to come to be. That's like some of the best points in gaming for me, and gaming history really are those innovations. All it takes is like a couple of really strong mechanics that work well with the already established mechanics, and you could have a masterpiece.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, you can kind of see that progression with The Witcher. You know, they went from whatever you want to call a combat system in Witcher 1.
Rhythm game.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
It's a pick your sword weapon rhythm game.
But then, you know, they pivoted to a more, you know, Dark Souls light action combat system in 2, and then they refined that in 3 and threw it into an open world. So you can kind of see that, and I think that's why their success story, was so, you know, successful. It was because, you know, they went through this progression and it just got progressively better, and then The Witcher 3 was just kind of like everything in one, like, you know, that's why, you know, Cyberpunk 2078, but 2079, that'll be the masterpiece.
That's when they get it. They finally understand everything. They have the engine working. They have the mechanics. They learn from their mistakes.
Yeah, because, you know, like Witcher 1, it was more narrative focused, whereas the gameplay was just kind of like, you needed gameplay. It's interesting, but it's not great. And then 2 really tightened up the gameplay and even tightened up the story in different ways. And yeah, and then it just all comes together in an open world. The best versions of all its facets. You know, it's really the best way to kind of progress and, you know, innovate on your franchises and your series.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that within a trilogy, not even just like, you know, keeping it, you know, stable for a while. Like, they innovated every time.
Sir.
Letter? Who from?
Can't rightly say, sir. I was just to deliver it.
I feel like we've wandered so far from the subject at hand.
Yeah.
But to be fair, it is quite a broad subject.
I mean, everything we're saying kind of relates back
But
to...
and I mean, we kind of knew getting into that's what would happen, so I'm not surprised by any means.
No, it's not necessarily...
I think it's funny. No, I think it's just funny. But, and I mean, ultimately, I think this question can be asked of gameplay versus narrative, can be asked about every genre and produce a different answer that's equally satisfying, if it's satisfying at all. Like, if you take a game like Call of Duty, that we brought it up a couple times, where the gameplay has to innovate for the game to remain engaging, and we've seen a big resurgence of the whole shooter genre with the birth of the battle royale genre.
The effects of such
And
exertion at your age can
what
indeed
I'm
prove
starting to
both
see is that,
detrimental.
especially in shooters, story is a very secondary thing. Pinning two opposing countries or two opposing factions in conflict, and just you're a soldier in that conflict, fight, go. It's enough of a story for most people who are adepts of shooters, because ultimately you always have that crutch of wanting to get better as a player, wanting to get that headshot, wanting to get those key shots, like just improving your proficiency in a shooter is in and of itself a driving force, where something like in an RPG, unless you're playing an RPG that's by design looking to challenge the player and make every fight meaningful, isn't gonna do that. Unless you're trying some form of challenge run of Final Fantasy, not every fight is gonna be meaningful, which is usually why they have this very distinct tone in the music between the regular encounters and the boss fights, because they want those boss fights to feel more meaningful beyond just what they represent story-wise. Gameplay-wise, boss fights are supposed to be a step up. And a lot of RPGs know very, very, very aware of the fact that the bulk of their battle isn't what's interesting. It's those key moments, those punchy boss fights, especially if you start looking at the optional boss fights that make a lot of those games ridiculously difficult. A few bosses from Final Fantasy IX come to mind right now, but or Final Fantasy VII, if anyone's done all of the weapon
I
play.
just finished doing them. I was able to do most of them, but Ruby Weapon was just like his mechanics just stopped me from being able to do anything, because he'll like flat out take your guys out of the combat, not kill them. Just
No, he pushes them out and they're just out.
Yeah, and you can't do enough damage to negate the healing that he's going to do every like 10 turns. So that pushed me out of it. But everything else was pretty solid.
I think I resent that a little bit.
Sorry, I just need to butt in. I just need to call a quick 5-minute break because work is calling me.
Oh,
okay.
So, I mean, keep talking amongst yourselves. I'm still recording, but I'm gonna be AFK for at least a few minutes.
Yeah, no problem.
Fine, moderator.
But Julian, you had a point to make on that?
Oh man, I don't know. That just disturbed me a little bit. I forgot. What was I just saying?
Well, we were talking about boss fights and
yes. Okay.
Boss fights and like.
Perfect. Thanks. Yeah, I was gonna talk about how in RPGs, in turn-based RPGs, I feel boss fights. They bother me a little bit more just because it occasionally can become. It's not always the case. But a badly made boss fight in an RPG could just be a numbers game and force you into a grind. You could beat it just based off the sheer time you've put into the game, rather than just the skill, which it could be a balance of both. But I think that when I think of like the best boss fights in any game, it's usually in games where you actively are playing, like in Dark Souls or Hollow Knight, Castlevania.
I definitely agree.
Yeah.
Games where you're like learning the structure of the boss and their movements.
You have to learn the cadence, and yeah, I can definitely agree. Though I have like one example of a game that's a bit of a counter argument to that, where Final Fantasy VIII did this thing where everything leveled with you, so the grind was meaningless, because the more you grind, the stronger enemies got.
Grinding was actually detrimental to you.
Was actually very detrimental. There were specific things.
Yeah.
There were specific things you could and couldn't grind that were either detrimental or useful. Like, the whole strategy was that you get into a fight, you draw all the magic you can draw, and then you run away.
Yeah.
Because what you wanted was the magic, not the experience. The experience was the detrimental part of it. You could technically finish the game at level 10, and the last boss would be scaled to be feasible. Challenging, but feasible.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is true that, and I'm certainly guilty of doing that in a couple of Final Fantasy games where you can definitely grind your way to success. And I mean, some RPGs like Monster Hunter, they're basically just grind fests from the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
Where the grind is the story, like the story of your character going through, jumping through those hoops becomes the story that's being told. Because I don't know for the most recent Monster Hunter. I have to say I kind of fell off the wagon a while ago about Monster Hunter. But my knowledge of Monster Hunter is that it's not a very story-driven game at all. If any, like barely.
Yeah.
That's a bit out of my realm of expertise. I've never played a Monster Hunter game, so I'm totally out of the loop.
I have Monster Hunter World on my PS4. I just haven't played it yet.
Same here, exactly the same thing. I have it. I'm like, man, I'd love to play this game, but I haven't played it yet.
I'm sitting on a masterpiece that everyone's like, you should definitely play, especially considering the intricate story of how I got my hands on it for free. But I'm sitting on Horizon Zero Dawn. I still haven't played, and I've heard only good things about it.
Yeah.
I've seen people RP, like in a system that's akin to D&D. I've seen people RP something that happens in the world of Horizon Zero Dawn, yet I've never experienced the game firsthand.
Yeah, I can see that.
I'd love to play that. That and Bloodborne. I'm like the worst Sony fanboy. I have like all these exclusives.
Yeah,
and I'll play them.
Oh, I'm just gonna ignore the best of them.
Right.
I'll only play the worst
we said Bloodborne too many times in our last podcast, and I'm getting my PlayStation 4 back so I can play very soon.
I made my new character, by the way. I haven't done much. I just like got to.
I want to challenge you to a race when I get my PS4 back.
Yeah, I think you'll win.
I'm gonna handicap myself. No, don't worry. I'm gonna make things fair, and I'm gonna handicap the crap out of myself. Don't worry. I'm not just gonna humiliate you for the fun of humiliating people. I keep that for work, but
it's fair. Me too.
Yeah.
But yeah. Oh man, work.
Yeah. Oh, and Dan, just to throw this out there, that phone call was what your meeting was, basically.
Oh, okay. So just
when a meeting could have been an email.
It was literally just like, "Are you gonna come back when we can have it?" And I'm like, "Yes." And I'm like, "Cool. See you then."
Of course,
See you then. Bye.
Exactly.
Nice.
Christ.
Yeah.
The joys of work.
Yeah.
I like to work. I'm.
I can't say I'm not. You know.
I hate my job, but I like to work.
Getting back to doing something, but we're not here to talk about that. We don't talk about work on your average gaming podcast. Or do we?
No. This is our job. This is our life now.
Yeah.
I wish.
I mean, I sincerely wish that through hard work we can make something out of each of our channels if we wish.
Yeah.
I think like we have something. I think
feel like
we
especially
can.
now we got a better chance because when we initially did it with the whole Torvis gaming thing,
oh yeah,
we were like 10 people, all with various directions.
We have such broad, and I mean that's very representative of the gaming community. How even in the small group of people that we had gathered to do that Torvis Gaming, which you should definitely go and follow me on Twitch, Twitch _ Torvis Gaming.
Hey, there's the plug.
Yeah, I had to. Sorry.
Go.
But we had all very broad, very different horizons when it came to gaming, both in terms of our prior history and in terms of what we enjoyed in gaming. And it could have given rise to something very interesting. It's sad that it didn't. But I think it could have been very interesting to see how those, I don't want to call them conflicting opinions, but they were certainly diverging opinions.
Yeah.
Could have made for an interesting show to watch.
Just between us, I'm going batty with boredom.
Yeah, we just needed. I mean, frankly, we just needed people to do things. We can sit around
We needed
and talk
people,
about
yeah.
everything all day, but like,
Yeah. Ultimately, there's 4 of us doing that podcast, and where are the others?
yeah, exactly.
Where is your god now?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Poison, eh?
But yeah, and ultimately, like, to kind of circle back towards that question, I think this is a question that definitely deserves asking, especially when you're starting to look at old franchises that are looking to freshen up a little bit.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, well, what is it that needs freshening up? Is it the story or is it the gameplay? Because something like Breath of the Wild did something, and you'll have to forgive the pun, they did something completely wild with the gameplay.
Indeed.
They tried something. That entire map, there isn't a single pixel that you can't try to climb or go on or go around. Or everything is room for exploration.
It's all a
And
Korok puzzle.
That is so. Korok Seeds was a nightmare, and I don't know who got that idea and why it got the okay. But Korok Seeds were. It was a good idea, poorly implemented.
Yeah.
Where they had to put a collectible that wasn't going to be your quarter piece of heart, and that wasn't going to be whatever orbs you got for doing the dungeons, that gave you some form of reward. Because otherwise, the name of the game becomes just clearing those 120 mini dungeons, then the 4 major ones, and then you're done.
Yeah, those
I mean,
bites.
The problem I had with the Korok seeds was that 900 might have been a bit too big a number, and getting a golden turd, sorry for the spoiler break, but getting a golden shit might not have been a proper reward. I understand that you get many little rewards along the way in the form of inventory spaces, and in the game where your inventory breaks on you all the time, that's very welcome addition, but there could have been a little bit more of a payoff at the end.
Like a permanent, something permanent in your
Yeah,
inventory
just
would be cool.
unbreakable master sword.
Yeah,
That would have been nice.
Yeah.
It's just a little detail, because to me that didn't make sense, that the master sword just went like womp and then softened up and then just I can't slash anymore. It was like, come on, come on, we're talking about the sword of evil's bane here, like.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Like all the other weapons degrading, okay, but the master sword should not.
In the mood for a round of Gwent?
Yeah, honestly, it's one of the few spoilers I've ever heard in a game where I was really happy to hear the spoiler because I was like, oh, thank God, I'm definitely not doing that now.
Korok seeds, yeah.
The Korok,
Same. I knew ahead of time. I was like, no, thank you. I probably wouldn't have done it anyway.
As soon as I heard how many there was, my first reaction was to check what the payoff was. And when I saw that it was just a trophy in the form of a shit, I was like, well, I don't give a shit.
Like, if there was a
It's
trophy and
literally-
a sword, something, at least it'd be better.
What are they trying to tell us? What are they trying to tell us about ourselves?
It's like you're wasting your time.
My bombs at this point, it's already more interesting than just a shit for the sake of it being a shit. Like, make it something, I don't care what it is, but something even remotely useful would have been better than what we got.
Use like an armor set, even if it was an armor set of shit. Like it would be better than just a useless shit.
Yeah, at least it's gold.
Yeah,
that's pretty.
But yeah, I hate when games have like clear like collections and things, and then the reward is just poop.
Yeah,
literal.
Like in
literal.
Like,
yeah, in that
and
case,
it's not like Breath of the Wild didn't know what to give you fun rewards. If you complete all of the 120 dungeons or shrines, you get like the original Zelda 1 armor, which is it's neat. Like that's the kind of thing that got me doing the whole 120 dungeons because I wanted that armor. It sucks, but I wanted that armor just to say like, yeah, I did it. Look, I have it.
That's cool. Yeah, it's a cool.
It's neat.
It's a throwback.
Yeah.
Like
but
if they gave you the
just an empty trophy, I don't know.
Like imagine it was like Majora's Mask, or if you got like
my favorite.
If you got like the what's the called the Fierce Deity. If you got
Fierce Deity Mask was dope.
If you got that for doing all the Korok seeds, it may have made me more motivated.
Oh man, yes. Or something akin to it, because Fierce Deity is like supremely powerful item.
Just the aesthetic, I mean, like if it made you just look like it.
Oh man, I would have gotten all 900 seeds. If you got a suit that's basically Fierce Deity and a weapon to match, I'm getting 900 of those. I don't care if it takes me 5 years.
No, but they had to sell that separately with the little amiibo things where you poke it.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. And the motorcycle and the...
Well, the motorcycle, that was the DLC. Yeah. That was the... see, that's the thing. The first DLC was kind of garbage. It was just like the Master Trials, and like I've done them, and like they're nothing special. They don't really add anything to the story, but they make your Master Sword harder to blow up, and it does twice the damage. But other than that, it doesn't really add too much. Or at least the second one,
Ballad of the Champion.
While it didn't do what I wanted it to do, which namely was give me a little bit more story with like the champions, it did, however, at least add its whole other dungeon, and like they added like a nice little official boss that wasn't just another Blight Ganon, because I mean that was the laziest. Yeah, don't get me wrong, I love Breath of the Wild, but that was the laziest way to write bosses. Let's just get 4 big dungeons. Aesthetically, they're all going to be identical, and
then put Phantom Ganon at the end of all of them.
Exactly. Like,
to be fair, they were interesting fights.
Yeah,
I was never bored playing those fights, but I agree that the whole building of it was kind of lazy.
Yeah. Like, you know, especially a series like Zelda, where you look in the past and you see all these unique, interesting, not only boss designs but boss mechanics. You know, and then here's just this I mean, it just felt like they were just an afterthought more than anything else.
Yeah, and as someone who hasn't played any other Zeldas, and knowing that the dungeons and the bosses in said dungeons are a huge part of it, and then it's not a thing.
It's the whole reason behind it.
Yeah, and then it's not a thing. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is okay, I guess. Like
I was unpleasantly miffed to find out that that's it. Those 4 dungeons are it.
yeah, and they're not even.
And
really
I don't even know
dungeons.
that I can call them dungeons
I
yet
wouldn't call
because
them
they don't feel like dungeons. They're like
Camel
one
felt like
puzzle
one a bit. The camel
one?
felt the one with the turning.
where you have to
cylinders.
rotate the parts.
That one felt a bit more dungeony, but yeah, they're a little shorter than how I remember. At least in my memory of playing older Zelda dungeons, that felt massive. As a kid, it felt like that was the whole game. Like in Wind Waker, I'd play. Wind Waker was like great. As a child.
Yeah,
that was
Wind
my
Waker was great.
That was my first Zelda game, and it was
Your first, hey, there you go.
my first console was my GameCube. So I was like, I got into gaming when I was like, I think 8. I got into console gaming.
Okay.
And yeah, that was my first introduction to Zelda, and it felt so big and ominous. And I don't think I got far at all in Wind Waker. I was too overwhelmed. I didn't know how to do anything.
Wind Waker is a lot to take in.
Yeah, definitely.
From a
I was
seasoned
like,
Zelda
what do I do?
player, like Wind Waker is a lot to take in.
Yeah, I'm actually, to be, just so I'm setting the stage and being fair with you guys, I'm not the best, I don't have the best history with Zelda in terms of, like, I have, I think, almost all of them, but I'm, like, profoundly bad at finishing Zelda games. I only finished Ocarina of Time when I was 19.
Nice tune.
And,
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, but because I was basically bullied into it by, like, literally anytime gaming came up, people were like, oh yeah, you like games, right? Like, and someone would come by and be like, yeah, but he's never played Ocarina of Time, and everyone's like, what? You monster! And I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake! So I went and beat it, and then one of my friends to this day, he'll still tell people I didn't play, even though I have. He'll tell people I didn't, and I'll get like shat on relentlessly before I can even defend myself. I'm like, no, I did. They're like, no, you.
I swear to God.
Yeah, it's like a trump card. Like, oh, you like games, but you played Ocarina of Time, and I couldn't finish many of the other ones. I basically only
you've done a lot more than I have.
Oh,
Yeah,
100%.
and I mean,
True.
Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask are a very interesting example of why asking gameplay versus narrative is an interesting question for that genre of gaming, because Majora's Mask is Ocarina of Time with a slight iteration on gameplay with the mask mechanics,
Yeah.
and a slight iteration on story where they wandered away from Ganon, introduced a very intricate story that a lot of people read a lot of double meanings to, and it's a very rich story. With the whole theory of grief and about Link possibly being dead, and
Yeah, exactly.
like there's a lot of richness to it. Even just on the face level of it, the idea that he goes back in time to undo all the good he's done just for the sake of doing it all in one fell swoop of 3 days. Like it was a very interesting idea, and it goes to show that very small adjustments, very small details can make a world of difference. Because I liked Ocarina of Time, but Majora's Mask will always be my favorite, and no one can ever convince me otherwise.
Yeah, hands
Because
down.
that slight nuance, that slighter darker tone, and that slight change in the mechanics, to me, was too meaningful to pass on. Even if it's very minute, it was just too much to say that.
Looking into.
It was just too much to say no.
So I want to agree with you. I like the world of Majora's Mask. I think the most of all the Zelda games. But the problem for me is that Majora's Mask does something that for me it's a very personal thing. When a game does this, I have a lot of difficulty playing it. Is when a game does anything with time, literally anything. If you have a timer of any kind on any level, I feel like all this pressure, even though you have plenty of time to do everything. There's perfect strategies. I know how to play Majora's Mask. It's just it messes with my process, because I kill a ridiculous amount of time in games doing stupid stuff that you shouldn't do. Like one thing like Witcher, Zelda, Assassin's Creed. Like I just like to explore and like try to look at things, and putting any form of timer on my experience does something psychologically to me, and it makes me like not really enjoy it anymore. and I couldn't finish Majora's Mask because of that. I've watched a lot of gameplay of it, and I've played a lot of it, but I can't.
I know what you mean, and maybe it's why my experience of Majora's Mask is so short. When I was super young, I rented it one weekend, and all I remember is time running out and that goddamn
The moon crashing.
coming down onto me, and I knew I was like, I have no doubt that it's so, as good as it is amongst the series, but like as my first experience with Zelda, a weekend of that, I was just like, I don't think this is for me.
I think the only way to really appreciate Majora's Mask is to come in right after playing Ocarina of Time, because otherwise there's a lot of things, both in terms of story and in terms of what's expected of you as you play, are kind of lost. Just because that timer can be really, especially since they put that timer on you, like, you do the little tutorial sequence, you get stuck as Deku, and then timer starts, let's go.
Yep. And you can't save until you figure out that first part.
Yeah, and then you get your flute back, and unless you really read and really go into what people are saying, you won't know that there's a way to slow the timer down or push it forward to your leisure. And that's definitely very important mechanics that going without would probably hinder. Like, my first time playing Majora's Mask definitely wasn't when it became my favorite. But when I started letting go of some of that habit I had of just fucking around and trying to figure stuff out, and started getting to it in a more organized, like, I have 3 days. What can I hope to achieve in that 3 days that's going to be slightly more meaningful than what I accomplished in the previous 3 days? And then you start building on that, and you start developing some of the stories that take longer to develop, like the whole couples mask. Overall, just getting all of the masks was an interesting puzzle, and figuring out how to do it with the time allotted to do it. I think it was interesting. But yeah, I can see why a timer would be a daunting challenge. Mario always gave you one, but it's always so trivial to get to the end of a stage before beating it, especially since you don't really have any exploration to do in a game like Mario.
No, I was also going to bring that up. I was also going to bring up Mario because I remember I didn't even notice the first little while when I would play Super Mario Brothers, like the NES one. I didn't notice there was a timer, and then when I did, it's like I know I won't run out of time. I still hate it. I hate that it's there. I'm like, I get that out of here. We don't need that. Yeah. It's a linear platformer. I don't need a timer. I don't need your stupid points.
I've seen a lot of Kaizo Mario games that play with the idea of some of those levels having very short timers as being what makes that level difficult. And there's certainly something to be said about something that's incredibly difficult also being difficult because it's like very time constrained. But in and of itself, I don't like timers as the challenge to beat. I'm with you on that one.
I think the only context in my mind where a timer is okay is when I think of the ends of like Metroid and Resident Evil games, and they put a timer because usually
the escape sequence.
Yeah, because it's typically trivial. Like usually it's just like, okay, they give you plenty of time, but it gives
if you're careful, you make it out.
Yeah, and but it adds to that, like, oh shit, I gotta get out of here or it's gonna blow, like, and that does work for that moment. But if you make me play a Resident Evil game with a timer, I'll never play it. I'll never play a horror game with a timer. It's like,
survival horror in general is one of those genres that you'll never see me playing.
Any idea
what imagine pressuring you into running out into the open because you have a timer. Like, you have to methodically, like, you have to think a lot when you're playing, like, a horror game. Like, I don't want to get myself killed. I have to, like, be careful. If you have a timer, it promotes recklessness. So you're like, oh, there's monsters, but, oh, I gotta run. Like, better not run out of time.
Yeah, you gotta go fast.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, no. No, thank you for a horror game. And, like, I don't know. Anyways, you're talking about Kaizo Mario, but even in like Mario 3D World, there's like or Mario Galaxy, there's like challenge levels where they start you at like 25 seconds, and they're like go, and like you have to just sort of hurry. And I definitely don't like those levels as much as the other ones where you have to pick up timers, give yourself a little bit more of time, because running out of time feels like it's such a cheap challenge to add to a game. It's so easy. It's like, oh, well, what's the motivation? Like, oh, well, if you run out of time, you die. It's so easy and it's so cheap it doesn't feel like a fair death. It just doesn't feel right. Like, I think the opposite would be better. Like, trying to beat your record time is fine. Like, oh, I want to see if I could beat the level faster than my record. Sure, but don't punish me for taking too long. I'm spending my time enjoying the game. Don't make me beat your game faster, because that's how it should be played. Anyway,
Yeah, and I agree. Yeah, and that's
I think the only game where that doesn't apply is something like Tetris, because the timer, and I'm putting quotation marks around timer, is more inherent to your skill level than to the game just telling you, nope, time's up, you're done, kind of thing, where you gotta learn to play to the game's pace or you'll die. But in a game like a platformer like Mario, like, why is there even one? Is it just so that player 1 can't fuck around and just waste player 2's life? Is that what it's all about? Because otherwise, then we need to have a talk. Because this is bigger than just putting a timer in a video game.
Well, I think that there are many different reasons for having a timer, and while I agree, timer for the sake of timer, completely unnecessary. But if you're on a strict time limit because of a story event that's happening, that's where I can kind of see the leeway getting a little bit more open. You know, like what I can think of right off the bat is Dead Rising 1 for the 360, where you know there's the artificial timer of, well, you got like 4 days until a helicopter arrives. Do what you can here. And as a story beat, I feel like that did a really good job at like just like, yeah, obviously it makes you feel pressure. But that's kind of what they're shooting for. They want you to feel like you can't just dick around and such. And obviously for some games it works better than others. I liked it in Majora's Mask because I feel like they gave you, albeit it was a little bit hidden, but they gave you enough resources to kind of manage your time and kind of adjust it depending on what you needed. The 3DS remake did a phenomenal job of that, allowing you to jump ahead to exact hours, as opposed to like, here's a half day and then go talk to this lady to waste 2 hours and blah 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 blah.
The notebook they gave you was also a little more comprehensive, so you had more information to work with.
Yeah, 100%. But that's kind of where I'm gonna say that story kind of, you know, takes over for that. And that's what I feel like in general. You know, we're talking about is gameplay better or story better? At the end of the day, they're both they're symbiotic. You know, you can't have gameplay without story, and there have been iterations where you could have story without gameplay. I'm thinking just right off the bat, Doki Doki Literature Club, which is a visual novel that does a
I don't know if you guys have seen that.
I've seen it. I've played it.
Oh, you played it? Oh, nice. Okay, so yeah, gameplay-wise, there's nothing. It's a click simulator.
There's choices.
There are choices. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. That's a good point. There are choices.
There is meta gameplay also towards the end of that game, but that's complicated.
Yeah. But that game itself is just it's a very interesting
definitely
thing.
a trip.
Yeah.
Watch your tone, Gramps. Just here.
Where was I going with this? I think all that to say, I'm just gonna, because I'm trying to condense this. Majora's Mask to me was a perfect sequel because it took something that was already great, which was Ocarina of Time. It innovated where it needed to. It gave the like you said, Louis, the tiniest little bit of gameplay was adjusted, like via the masks and whatnot, and some little quality of life things here and there. But ultimately, they took the story with more or less the same game and they made this completely unique experience, which forever will be my favorite game of all time.
Oh, that bad, huh? Nice.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like just by, because you know, mechanically, I felt that the game mechanics limited the world that I was in. I wanted to know more about each of these individual people, and like, had the technology at the time been like even like, you know, creation engine level, where like NPCs have their own routines and stuff. What we saw in Majora's Mask was a very rudimentary
implementation of that. Yeah,
exactly. And I would have liked to have spent more time, not necessarily engaging, because like, you know, rolling around as a Goron was super fun, or swimming with the Zora was like N64 Zora, the Majora's Mask.
And then getting the Deku Mask off.
Yes, yeah. All that to say, I played it for the story, and I feel like the reason it's become this cult classic and so beloved in so many people's minds. Is because of the story, because of the relationships and the characters that you meet and make, and it just goes to show like how something so simple as just changing a few lines of dialogue can completely alter a game. I will forever love Ocarina of Time. It was my first fucking console game. I got it at the same time that I got my N64, and I loved it, and I will forever love it. But Majora's Mask will always squeak out on top because the story is just that much better.
Know that already.
Yeah, I think Majora's Mask story aged a little better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was nuance to it. I mean, Ocarina of Time, for all it was, like, don't get me wrong, it definitely innovated. It was like the first 3D game that like really made your eyes pop. But at the end of the day, like, what was the story? You know, like, go get some stones, beat the bad guy, save the princess. You know?
Save the princess.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you know, we could sit here and we could argue about which is better and whatnot. At the end of the day,
ultimately that's going to boil down to subjectivity.
Yeah.
If we're talking about better, then that definitely is going to boil down to subjectivity.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, you still make arguments either way, and I think kind of building on what you're saying with Majora's Mask and like the story of it is, you notice, like, you know, the you know, within video games and you know, as a whole as well, the things that stick the most, the things that, you know, have the most passionate fan bases, things, at least for me, I'm most nostalgic for, are the games that, you know, told a story and had me play with a certain, you know, cast of characters that are just so memorable. I mean, like, that's the entirety of Mass Effect's entire success and existence, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately its downfall.
Ultimately, yeah, because they shit the bed on it, but, you know, that it is what it is. But, like, I mean, you look at all the other big games, you know, like, for you, like, Dan, you're saying Zelda, and which, you know, maybe at least on the outside isn't, you know, the first game you think of for, like, deep narrative, but you're saying it's your favorite game because of the narrative. So what does that say about, you know, narrative and gameplay when a game that on the surface is more about its gameplay and its dungeons is still being considered, you know, so highly but for its narrative? And I think, like, yes, gameplay is fundamental to games in a way that narratives just don't have to be, because you can make a game without a narrative. But if you want to make a game truly like special, unless you're going for like a very specific kind of game, but like if you're making, you know, games that have the potential for story, and you put the amount of effort into that, it'll always yield more, I think, in the long term.
Gameplay, I feel, will age far quicker than a good story. Because, especially with the way that we see, like, you know, how fresh was my graphics card when not only a year later, like, the 20 series came out, and then the 30 series, and they made everything obsolete. Like, technology will continue to advance, gameplay will continue to innovate, but story lasts forever. And obviously, yes, some stories will be scrutinized a little bit more than others because of the evolving, you know, PC agenda and such. But, I mean, when you come down to the two, I feel like story has more sticking potential.
Well, ultimately, story is going to be what elicits the biggest emotional reaction, I suppose. So, if gameplay, like something like Bloodborne or Dark Souls, like it's very centric to like one emotion, that feeling of frustration versus the accomplishment. You won't have a broad range of emotion through a gameplay like that of Dark Souls. But with the story that you can weave around it, you can add so much nuance and so many nice things and so many nice ways to explore similar themes, but to give it different color. That I agree. Ultimately, whether or not I declare this question a non-question or whatever you want to say, like, to me as a gamer, the story is always going to be one of the fundamental driving engines that I crave. It's what got me into gaming 26 odd years ago, and it's what's keeping me going. I have these mindless games that I play that don't really have story, like I'm playing Minecraft right about now.
Yeah.
And I don't need it to call something a good game. But for myself, for my enjoyment, if you want to make it to my top 10, you'll have to have a good story, because you're competing against some pretty serious mastodons here.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think that another thing that we're underestimating, and I could go on about this, I think, indefinitely, is also atmosphere. So games that don't necessarily have an overt story.
Yeah, especially as a fan of horror.
Yeah, it's just Man, atmosphere is like one of my favorite topics in games because I think that
Lend them to you.
some games might have not great stories.
Say to that.
I think they should have good gameplay, but having that atmosphere that makes you really immersed in a game, and you especially in a horror game where you're nervous or you're anxious, it plays on that and the mystery of what you're going to see. And I think that a game like Dark Souls does have a strong atmosphere. It also has some narrative, of course, but the atmosphere is.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just gonna say that the atmosphere is really present. It's thick and it's present.
And I'd argue for Dark Souls, the story, as obscure as it is part of probably one of the reasons it became so popular, is because it also had this really intricate story that you had to work for to uncover, and you could. Yeah, I just think that alongside with everything else it does really helped elevate it into becoming, its own genre. Well, I have a question to pose, a pretty straightforward, but
Sure.
question that.
Let us hear it.
All right. What is your favorite narrative in a game?
Oh no.
Favorite narrative in a game?
Completely
Define.
detached from the gameplay. It may not be your favorite game. Just the best story you've experienced in a game.
Oh man, okay, let me
Not
think.
even necessarily your favorite. It could be in a genre you're not familiar with, but you just know this was just so good.
This was so rich.
And also, you can also if you want to maybe narrow it down, one that really works as a game too.
You're gonna kill me with this.
I know. I can give one right off the bat while you guys are.
Witcher 3.
Yes, it's up there, but it wouldn't be
Yeah. Show us some variety here, Jacob.
Yeah. Well, The Witcher 3, obviously, but I'll give you two others that are completely different. Nier Automata.
Ooh.
Especially because Nier, as we talked about, the ideal is gameplay and their story, right?
Ooh, yeah.
Nier's one of the few games where I feel like it was a masterclass at both.
Nier blew my mind.
Weaved them both together. The gameplay
Yeah.
is part of the story, and the way it has multiple playthroughs and stuff. I could talk for
Oh,
an hour on
yeah.
it, but that
That's
game,
well done, yeah.
that game is the pinnacle of what I think it means to be a video game, both from a gameplay and a narrative standpoint. It does things that no other art form could do.
You do have a very strong argument with that one. Nier Automata is a beautiful piece.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And my other one that I'll throw out there, and this one's just more the quality of the writing and just how good of the story it was top to bottom, and that's Planescape Torment.
Oh, I haven't played that. I know that that's supposed to be one of the best.
It's as far as a single self-contained story, it's unmatched. I'd say it's a higher quality story than The Witcher, but The Witcher has all the emotional stuff of being a trilogy and personal preference. But as far as just the best well-written story presented in a video game, it's Planescape, and it's not even close.
I'll go later here because I'm looking at my list. I have a list of games that I really love. I'm trying to narrow it down. I'm okay, well this one had this and this one. So I'll be on this for a millisecond just to kind of narrow it down.
Everyone's got one. Go ahead and chime in.
I'm gonna have to give more
is
than one.
very tough. Yeah, I have
gave three pretty
multiple.
much. I'll put Witcher 3, Planescape, and Nier are my apex of it.
Yeah.
There's so many stories and so many games that blew my mind for so completely different reasons
Yep.
that it's going to be really hard to pick just the one. But
I know it's tough. This is a question I've thought about, for years. So I had the answer
I
ready,
think-
but I know it's tough.
one of my first games that came to mind when you mentioned that subject was Catherine. Catherine proposes something that a lot of games tried, but everyone failed, which was to give meaning to a story in a puzzle game. And by the end of the experience, you have to be thinking something. You can't play through Catherine, be engaged in the story, and think nothing by the end of it. It's just nonsense to me.
That's a
But
pretty compelling argument to play the game, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a good game.
It's beautiful. I was expecting something very, very simple, kind of lighthearted,
or extract.
But what I got was just a masterclass on story writing. But in man, this is so tough. Like I'm glancing back and forth between the like 7 different libraries of games that I have looking for inspiration because honestly, oh man.
Try. Okay, here's what I'm using to try and help myself. Try and maybe pick something that's like it's great on every front. Because right now I was looking a lot at like Silent Hill 2, which does I love the story of Silent Hill 2, but I don't think it's fantastic on every front. I think it's a good story, but it's not like wow, like that's the best story in games. It's just because of the voice acting and everything doesn't all reach that top level. I think I have to, for one of my choices, pick Red Dead Redemption 2. I think that like performance-wise, atmosphere, character arcs, fighting, like it's consistently, and character development, plot, like oh man.
Yeah, no, I have to agree with you 100%. Like Arthur Morgan's like top 3 favorite protagonists in a game for me.
Yeah, I think Red Dead Redemption 2 is just so like it's rich. It's so rich in character. Yeah, and I love characters in games, so that's one of them. It
benefits so much from its slow burn at the beginning and really pays off all the character development and story and.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's exactly how I feel about it. Yeah. So that's I'm gonna limit myself to a max of 3 because I would go on forever.
Hey, now it's my turn to get a phone call from work. Be right back.
Hey.
All right.
It's like, oh, I'm getting my job back. Oh, you're losing yours.
Oh boy!
Could you imagine?
There can only be one.
Yeah.
So to help keep COVID level, they're opening their restaurants but closing the grocery stores. Everyone has to be out for 3 months.
Evening it out, basically. Narrative and gameplay. I mean,
happen to play Gwent, would you?
It's hard to think
of. It's more
of.
just narrative. Like this, for now, like it doesn't have to have a good gameplay for this game to be.
Oh, okay. So you're saying just the best narrative?
Yeah. I said Nier. I mentioned gameplay with Nier because it happens to be both, but
yeah, it's woven in.
But like, I mean, like, The Witcher's gameplay is nothing special. It's good, but it's nothing special, you know.
I mean, it's gonna sound kind of shitty to say, but I think that the two that I could think of right now are both BioWare games. But I guess this was pre-EA, or it's just.
As long as it's before like Dragon Age 2 came out, you're good.
Oh yeah. Oh, Dragon Age, that's a good one too.
Yeah.
But the 2 I could think of right off the bat. I mean, obviously Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic. I mean, what can you say? It's a great story. I've gone back and played it like so many freaking times at this point, and I feel like every time I go back, there's another line of dialogue that I haven't tried yet, and it opens up a completely different way to do something. And this is an old game, and I was talking earlier about how obviously gameplay-wise, it didn't do much to like really bring me in, like and I think Jacob can attest. At first, the gameplay loop was confusing more than anything else. I wasn't like super familiar.
Wasn't its strong suit at the start.
No, exactly. Which will actually kind of lead to my second pick, which is, I mean, at least Mass Effect 1 and 2. 3 did its own thing, whatever, but 1 and 2, where, especially 1, I could say, where the narrative just totally overshadowed the gameplay. Because the gameplay was so experimental, let's call it. I mean, it came around the time of the Gears of War cover-based shooting and whatnot, so it kind of had that to lean on. So you can't even say that it did anything like unique or fresh, but what it did do, basically. Oh, those nades. But what it did really do was give me this grand, rich universe to explore in, as well as having like a really intricate storyline. So that gave me kind of the best of both worlds. It gave me the opportunity to explore and to kind of read into more story, either through the journal entries or even just talking to random people. 2 will forever be my favorite from the Mass Effect trilogy because I feel like that's the one that really married great storytelling, especially with like all your side companions' backstory. Like that was great. That was amazing. Yeah. But at that point, they also started to figure out their own identity in terms of gameplay. The combat was tighter, the menus were less, pardon my French, but clusterfucky. It just felt like a more clean, streamlined experience, and had it not been for the 3rd game, I feel like narratively it would have been one of the best, because I never had felt so involved in the main story. Like, you just think about how many different potential ways that game can end. Like, ultimately, yes, it will always be Shepard does the thing and then he escapes off the ship. But the fact that like companions would live or die based off of how deep you dove into who they were, that was amazing to me. That was the best way to make me feel like I was involved in this universe that they're presenting in front of me.
Wait, what game was that you're talking about? I missed the beginning.
Mass Effect 2 specifically. I feel like because we were talking about our favorite games.
Yeah. No, I got that part. I remember that part. Yeah, Mass Effect 2. Well, Mass Effect 2, yeah, you had to do the loyalty missions to save everybody.
Yeah. They forced.
That's true.
Not that they forced. Like you could do it one way or the other.
They
and, like,
encouraged.
And even if you didn't, some of them could still die if you were like me and didn't upgrade your ship.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you didn't upgrade the ship, or you sent them on the wrong mission. Like they forced you to be so involved in the story that like gameplay really took like a back seat. But Mass Effect 2, like I was saying, like the gameplay really felt more married to the story than the previous entry. Like I was talking about Mass Effect 1, how they were still kind of finding their feet and how like certain things were overcomplicated.
Yeah, Mass Effect 1 was by all intents and purposes a proof of concept.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like 2 is really where they found their footing. Both in terms of like having solid gameplay,
and then 3 shot itself in the back.
And 3 just decided. I mean, they just took all those great decisions you made in 1 and 2, and they just trivialized it all. Yep. So yeah, had it not been for Mass Effect 3, Mass Effect 2 probably would have been like my favorite game.
I think the world is one thing that you gotta commend them on. Like the world of Mass Effect is so deep. Compared to like almost any other game world that I can think of, the ones that are exclusive to games, mind you. So like game worlds that are just reserved for video games, I think Mass Effect might come on top for just having the most depth and variety. There's so much there. It's amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
Just read the codex all day.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I used to read a lot. Louis, do you have a choice yet, or are you still?
Man, no, sorry, that word call kind of threw me on a bit of a loop. I mean, I think I'm gonna go for Majora's Mask.
Oh.
That game grew on me, but in a way that no other game ever did, and I don't think no other game ever will. Because the older I got, and the more I played the game, the more what I saw as a pretty light-hearted game took some darker and heavier implications every playthrough I did. Like, every time cycle I did gained weight because it dawned on me that what I was doing as a mechanic of the game of rewinding time had quite heavy implications on the story of those people. Because in a game that's usually built around doing good around you, having not just the choice, but the necessity of undoing it all for the sake of the greater good was kind of a harrowing experience. Especially when you get to those more late game quests of like I mentioned before, the couple's mask, which you work so hard to get these two individuals to spend 5-10 minutes together, only to undo it all in front of them, because by then the moon's crashing down on you and you don't really have anywhere else to be but in that room with them as you undo it all. I couldn't tell you how old I was when I played that Song of Time that brings you back and realized that what I had done was actually monstrous. But it's so beautiful in that it's monstrous only to you because you're the only one who will remember.
That's it.
You're the only one who's fixed in this. You're the only one taking in all that pain. And it grew on me. It became quite heavy. A lot of games have wowed me for their storytelling, some in more explicit ways than others. I mean, I love the story that's hidden behind Bloodborne, but digging into it deep enough to get the full picture, like, I'm not even sure I have the full picture. There's certainly an item or two that add a bit of nuance that I don't have.
Yeah.
But overall, like, there's so many good examples of good stories, because they don't all address their story. Like, what it means to have a good story can be so broad. Like, in many ways, I love the way the story of Bayonetta is presented. It fits its own style so well, and its presentation is so well thought out. But I can't call this the best just because of how it didn't move me. Impressed me, certainly, but it didn't have this moving effect that a story like
that's-
Majora's Mask had on me.
Yeah, well,
I think
that's
the
what it
moving-
comes down to, yeah.
Yeah, the moving is what we're looking for here, right? Like
That's
a narrative
what
that
separates it.
Oh fuck! But it makes it so much harder because like there's games that move me in different ways. Games that gave me existential crises. Games that made me cry. Games that made me laugh. It's like it's hard to pick like the one that like either moved me the most or the one that was just universally the best. Like for me, the best writing I've ever seen in a game, I would give to Disco Elysium.
Oh,
Like as a
I've
game.
heard good things
top
about
on
that.
my to-do list. I just haven't gotten around to it yet.
Well, I would wait a couple months because they're gonna do a fully voiced version for free if you own the game.
yeah,
If
that
you
was
own
cool.
it, yeah,
Damn. Then yeah,
Yeah.
definitely wait
it's
for
free
that.
update. So
Okay. I had no idea.
Mhm.
yeah, that game, without a doubt, is like the best writing. Like there are some of the funniest moments, laugh out loud moments I've ever seen in a video game from just writing and like from such mundane things to do in that game. Like they turn mundane, boring, stupid, garbage gameplay into some of the funniest, most engaging shit I've ever seen. Like something as simple as opening a box or something like that. You have to like roll. You're like, oh, I want to open the box. It's like, okay, well, you want to open it like a normal human being, or do you want to attack it or something? And you're like, maybe I'll talk to it and try and seduce the box into opening. And you're like, your partner is just like, what are you doing? You're like, hey, box, looking pretty good. And your partner's like, are you out of your mind? And you're like, hold on, it's gonna work. It's gonna work. And you just keep doing it.
It's
And
gonna
you
work.
could like miss a roll on something stupid like that, and you're like, you trip and fall and you die, and you're like, okay, well, game over. Like restart, and you're like, what am I doing? What is this game?
Yeah, the little I played, I can 100% relate. But yeah,
It's
there's a full
masterpiece.
voiceover. I'm definitely gonna jump back into that.
Oh, 100%.
Wait, I had an inspiration for a more refined version of the question. Well, if you want to, have a less broad range of games to choose from, what games, if any, have made you cry?
Okay.
Ooh.
You inspired
only
me.
one.
Yeah, hold on. I'm gonna start by prefacing this with I'm not much of a crier.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. I don't think
But-
most of us probably aren't, but I have a couple.
Man, I got teary-eyed at the end of Mass Effect. The whole deal. Mass Effect 3. As
Oh,
much as
that's-
I can
Where
hate,
specifically?
as much
Just
as
at
I
the
can
end?
hate, a little bit before going into the final mission, when it started dawning on me, because I was of those fortunate enough to say that everything Mass Effect 3 retconned was in line with what I had done, so I wasn't aware of the retcon.
Same here.
I enjoyed Mass Effect 3 very thoroughly because I never, until the end, noticed what a lot of people have complaints about.
Exact same thing for me.
So when I got to that point where I knew the story had to end because of what was being set up, I went into it a little reluctantly. I didn't want it to end, and when it did, as much as I couldn't say that I was disappointed by the whole ending, there was a part of me that felt really gray for at least a week, because I was like, I spent and I got into Mass Effect when I purchased the collection edition on PS3. So I went through 1, 2, 3, back to back to back.
God damn.
And that was an experience that, honestly, it's one of the many reasons I have a hard time getting into series of games when I know that it's in its infancy, because I know that that wait in between 1 and 2 will only nurture resentment. The things that we dislike, the things that hurt us, tend to be more
You willing?
apparent and more salient than the things we love, which is why asking about something you dislike about a game usually nets you a more direct, more rapid answer than asking what was the favorite thing you've experienced in gaming. Because ultimately the things that hurt us, or the opportunity lost, kind of lingers longer, and being able to go through all three so quickly was definitely something. But if I have to pick one moment that got me really there, walking into that final fog gate of Dark Souls, I was ready to cry.
Oh, with Gwyn,
I
yeah.
was ready to cry.
Prepare
That
to cry,
song, everything about that song, that moment, the effort I had put to get there, I was there. It wouldn't have taken much to get me fucking bawling.
Yeah. Well, I'll piggyback off you because one of mine is also Mass Effect, but very different way it played out.
Different context.
But some similarities. So like I beat the game, right? And like you, but for a weekend I was like horribly depressed. This was before extended cut, before anything. This was the raw, penetration they laid on me.
Raw dogging.
Yeah,
Raw penetration.
Basically.
Yeah, and it was awful. And then I was just sad. And then they did the extended cut, and I played it, and I wanted to be less sad, but I really wasn't. And then, eventually, the Citadel DLC came out. And I played that. And I cried my eyes out at the end of it.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. It was just, it was so good compared to the end. And I was like, first I was just like angry, like, why is this so good and the ending so bad? But
You have no right to be so potent.
Have any of you, did any of you play the Citadel?
I have.
Unfortunately.
I haven't, but I know what happens, basically.
Yeah, well then the moment that was very similar to your coming to terms moment is at the end of that Citadel DLC where they're all just kind of gathering before going back on the ship, and you can tell they're all sad and stuff because it's about to end, and then at one point, your love interest says, it was a good ride, and then Shepard says it was the best, and then that was it for me.
Yeah.
Ooh.
And then I'm like, all that. I'm like, oh, it's so good, and I'm just like, oh my god, but I know what's
I was
coming.
holding up fine until now.
And like, it was much sadness as it was like anger.
It's bittersweet.
It was too many things. It was too many things. So that's
a good choice. That's a powerful moment. I have to say.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had also quite contrary experiences where I had some games that had me at the very end cheerful and so enthused about just doing more, but deep moments like this are so much better.
New contract.
Yeah.
Of the contract in question.
Dan, do you have a moment?
Yeah, I mean, anytime that I play a Zelda game, I'll get nostalgic about it. The one that I could think of that made me cry a bit, I guess that would have been in Skyward Sword, just because the story is so...
Yeah, oh man.
They focus a lot harder on the relationship between Link and Zelda in Skyward Sword.
Yeah.
And it pays off so beautifully, and especially because it's the game... Skyward Sword is canonically the first...
It's the beginning, yeah. It's the fall from heaven of the gods.
Yeah, and to have played it after so long, because obviously all these other games, I've played Ocarina of Time at release, and Majora's Mask, and Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, etc., but I feel like they never touched on the relationship between Link and Zelda, especially in Twilight Princess.
They did in Breath of the Wild, and I think they did it better in Breath of the Wild.
I agree, 100%. I wish there was more of that in Breath of the Wild, to be completely honest. But
honestly, no, I don't. Honestly, I don't. No? I'm gonna be honest with you. I think they did it perfectly in Breath of the Wild. They insinuated it, gave you enough to know that there's something, and then they just left it to you to have your own brain canon, and that's something I absolutely adore, because I am a huge fan of writing fanfic, and that's the kind of shit that's just fanfic gold right there.
Yeah,
because you can write, do, and think everything you want. I hope so, honestly.
Yeah.
I want to see what the Nintendo headcanon is.
Yeah, basically. But if it came down to which game I significantly remember having an emotional reaction to, it was Earthbound. Because I only played Earthbound 4 years ago at this point. Because I picked it up every once in a while, but the initial combat system and everything, it turned me off a little bit. But then I finally actually sat down, played it, and by the end of it, they do this little thing where I know a lot of games, they'll give you that last boss fight, and then it's all just cutscenes and cinematics, and the game's over and whatnot. But with Earthbound, they gave you a couple cutscenes, but then before you finish the game, they're like, here's the world.
Go back, talk to people.
Yeah, talk to people. See the results. Awesome. Oh my god, and just certain characters having certain storylines finish and some not, and it's all very comedic and such, and they have you walk through all these horrific areas that you've had to go through, and just seeing the impact that you've made on that place and the people that you left behind, and just thinking how much your character, your little Ness, who of course Earthbound's amazing because they let you name each of your 4 main characters, and I
Yeah.
decided to just name them after me and my friends. And like they have so many, it just connected with me on such a level. By the time it was over, and like they have this beautiful soundtrack playing over the back, I was just absolutely bawling my eyes out, which was unfortunate because I was going to work. Trying to drive to work in like rush hour traffic with like wiping tears from my eyes and such, and I was an absolute mess on the line that night. I definitely got made fun of for it, but
As you should.
of course. But more games like that. That's a game that can draw an illicit emotional response out of me is what I've been looking for. And it's sad to say, but I feel like there aren't too many recent games, like I'd say in the last 5 years or so, that have really had that kind of an impact on me.
Well, I'll hard disagree because my second Crier is a game that came out last year.
Oh?
Yes.
Dark secret.
Yeah, what's that?
What isn't?
Building the suspense.
Yeah.
Drum roll.
Cyberpunk.
No. This was a good cry, okay? A very unexpected one, I'll say that. But it happened, and it was at the very end of Ghost of Tsushima.
Oh, really, huh?
Like, you know the ending I got, Julian?
Yeah, we got different endings, right? We got the opposite?
Yeah. The one I got right after, once that was happening, the music, the credits roll, I'm just like, oh my god, and it was weird. Like, I didn't hear it coming. It was just one of those ones, just like, oh, well, I guess this is happening.
Yeah, I have an interesting second runner-up in my list of tearjerk moments. It was when I reached the end credits of Hades.
Oh.
When you actually complete enough playthroughs to see them roll credits and have the song and everything that's happening in the lore of the game happening, it was just because one thing about Hades that I cannot say enough good stuff about is definitely the music and the songs. And the one that they had for the roll credits was just it was so good.
Nice.
So good.
Yeah, Bastion had a pretty killer soundtrack as well. It's the same guy, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think so.
Soundtrack for all of them. Great soundtracks on all Supergiant games. To be honest, they know what they're doing. They're good. They're really good at what they do. I'll drop my one and only because I know there's only one game that's made me cry. Movies don't make me cry. Shows don't make me cry. This one game, I don't know. Maybe it was the right timing, but I think I was prepared to cry. But I don't know how many of you guys have played To the Moon.
I have not.
I was just thinking it. I'm like, he's going to say To the Moon. Yes.
Oh my god.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, like, I don't remember how much I cried, but yeah, I definitely got teary-eyed at multiple moments in that game.
Multiple moments, but for me this was not teary-eyed. I was bawling.
Crying.
I couldn't play the game. I was like, was back I went to go see my brother. He was like in the house, and I went to go see him, and he was asleep. And I just opened the door, and he's like, Julian, and he turns on the lights, and he just sees me bawling. He's like, what happened? I'm like, it's so sad. He's like, what's happening? The game. Like, I'm not gonna ruin it for you guys because obviously I wouldn't mind if you played it one day, whenever that may be.
You want an emotional response from a game? You need to look no further.
Yeah.
There's more than one moment though. It was like the ending. Okay, there's. Okay, I'll say this is the best way I could put it without spoiling it. Is there's a part where like the only part of the game I think that has like a song with lyrics, like someone singing.
Yeah.
Like there's like an actual soundtrack with a song, and like there's just a cinematic with that song, and like I can't even listen to that song even now. Like, I'm
keep talking about it. I might have to mute myself.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, like hearing that song, like I feel like my heart drop. Even there's a piano song that's like a theme of the game. There's a piano song called Forever.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I hear that song, I'm like, no, like turn it off. Like I don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
Here come the waterworks.
Back in the day, I was like at work and I'd be playing music in the back, and occasionally like I guess it would be on loop or random, and then like a song from that would come on and be like, oh, I better turn that off.
Nope, abort.
Yeah,
oh, yeah, I know.
Every time.
Yeah. No, I know the exact
my
thing
heart
you're
drops.
talking about.
I've certainly made myself guilty of having to change songs because those songs were tied to very powerful feelings.
Don't mean to pry, Your
Unfortunately, not many that had to do with video games.
Mind telling me about
But yeah,
So long as it's not.
But still, they carry moments of, like a feeling, whatever you felt when you heard that song. Like it's gonna remind you kind of what you felt.
Yeah.
But I mean,
music
there's
in general
context.
is such a powerful thing.
He was to compose
Yeah, of course.
a song about a
It's just that, well, in the context of the game, the music is like sometimes diegetic, like it's being played in the game too. So there's like
Papa was
they tie the music into the game as like same as like Bastion does. Like Bastion, I know like characters sing. So like when you hear songs, they're like
You
more...
encounter the same thing in Hades.
I get it.
Oh yeah, I know. Well, I know that. What's her name?
Eurydice.
Yeah, she
Eurydice
sings.
and Orpheus.
Yeah.
Like there's a
They
whole
sing.
plot line to get them together so that they can sing together again, and it's just when you finally do it, it's just the good songs that you had before, upon sometimes reaching where she's hiding, were just made even better by having the voice harmonies.
Okay, I can't even imagine. I've only heard her sing, so I can't imagine having them together because he's still not singing in my version. But having them together, I can imagine.
Another moment that definitely got me a little
their
wet in
contest,
the
Ademar
eyes
to an altogether comfortable
was,
way of picking the
I won't
prime
spoil it
apple
'cause,
from the bushel of potential
I know Dan hasn't
husbands.
played it, but the
Determining
end
who had
of
what she
Nier
valued
Automata,
most in men.
when you
Strength,
finally realize
valor,
I have
and
chills just thinking about
you
it.
finally realize what's
Thus she
going on and
commanded them to take
what's
part.
happening.
Oh.
You're just like,
Though in the end she chose not
That
to.
one line drop that just
The youngest son
confirms all of the
God's
suspicions you had,
yeah.
She
and
met
it's
on
just
the journey
like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Yeah, oh yeah, powerful stuff.
And just talk about soundtracks.
Very much so.
That is,
And not
Oof.
only they.
I still listen to it every now and then.
yeah,
Because it's
Good
just
music
so
in that
good.
game.
it's some of the best like I've ever heard in a game.
Like they made up a language just so that they could sing over
Yeah,
some of the
Duchess's
songs,
hand and half the Dutch
but in a way
hand.
that you wouldn't understand.
yeah.
Because ultimately the meaning of the words isn't what matters.
Of
It's,
that we
oh
are
man.
proud.
Oh man.
my
Nier Automata
favorite-
was so good.
My favorite sounds, music from that game is probably just City Ruins, like the full version, and
Yeah.
and the because that was like my entrance into a game I knew so little about. Like I just knew it was good. And that music started like swelling. I was like, oh, I feel like I'm in for something like that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm about to start like a cool adventure.
Yeah, yeah. It definitely makes it pretty clear pretty quick that you're in for something special.
Oh yeah, it makes a pretty strong statement just from the start and then just keeps riding.
Yeah, and most of the all-time games do just that. I knew Mass Effect was special when I got to the first menu screen, in the first music place. I'm like,
Oh,
this is
yeah.
gonna consume my life. It's already been.
Yeah, there was something about it that was just perfect.
Yeah, you just got the sense that this was a creation by people who knew what they were doing and did it well.
Montreal.
I mean, yeah.
Montreal knows its ways around good games.
Have you guys played Soma by any chance? Just out of curiosity.
No,
Oh, that's
definitely
good.
not my forte.
Is that the survival
Okay, it's the
horror
horror.
that like takes place underwater or something along those lines?
That's it. But just so you guys know, if you do want to play it and you don't like horror games, you could turn off monsters completely.
Oh.
If they don't. To be honest, I just watched my brother play it entirely, and like. I watched him play with the monsters, and it's really up in the air. I think most people would agree they don't do anything. Like, they don't really add anything, so you can just turn them off. Like, they'll still be there, but they won't kill you.
They add an
Yeah.
element of tension.
Yeah, they do, but... Oh, like, they're so, like... They add an unnecessary challenge, and some of them are a little OP. Like, there's a few parts where, like, they're so fast, and, like, you can't really get away from them. I feel like it might not really add, because what makes Soma, for me, one of the best stories in a game is it's all about existential dread. Like, it hit me, like, after I finished that game, I was like, for like weeks, I was like, what is the meaning of life? Like, I was just kind of like, Nier Automata can make you feel that way sometimes. But, like, I think this game, they really, like, they just drive it home so hard. Like, the game is punishing you mentally so much, like, just from the narrative alone. Not from, like, the oppressive atmosphere, not from the monsters, which are obviously helping, but there's the implications. Like, the game has moral choices, and they almost never matter, like, in terms of, like, changing your ending or whatever. But just the fact that the question is being proposed, it's like, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, like, on every moral choice in that game. It's like, it hurts to play that game, but it's beautiful. Like the writing, the idea itself is nuts. Like it's so not what I expected. I was thinking like, oh, I'm going to be playing Amnesia, but like not called Amnesia. And that is
Right.
not what could not be further from what that game is.
I'm Lazar Lafargue. Geralt of
So yeah, I highly recommend if you want a good story. And yeah, I don't think you're like a baby if you turn off the monsters. I think just playing it for the story is well enough, honestly.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I'm sure you'll be interested all the same.
Dan, have you played it?
Well, I've seen playthroughs of it. Basically, I watch a couple of YouTubers and they go through it, and I think it was Markiplier who went through it when I watched it, and like I love watching this guy because he'll let his emotions get involved when he's not just doing a show, you know, still like playing the games and such. So yeah, just kind of watching it, like even just as an outsider watching him play it, I can see these emotional responses that the game. They certainly were trying to get something from you, and I feel like they succeeded very well at it.
Like, so you know the whole story then? Like,
Yeah.
Okay, you know how fucked up everything is. Yeah, that game.
Yeah, 100%. Just good stuff. Good and like stuff that's not so good that makes you a little sad about life, but you know, it's a video game, right? So we all got to remember.
Yep. It's just a game.
It can hurt you. It can hurt you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Oh, Christ.
That game hurt me. I think that's like one of the only games that really like. There's games that like I thought about a lot afterwards that made me kind of like morose. Like playing Life is Strange made me like a little bit nostalgic and a bit sad, but it wasn't like the same. Like Soma does like is like psychological damage. It's like
yeah.
I'm like, oh man, I don't know anymore. Like I don't know. Oh shit! Did we lose Lost Louis? Yeah, he just sent us Lost Power.
Lost Power.
There we go.
Well, I mean. that's pretty. 2.5 hours ain't too bad. Fuck, I don't want to do any closing thoughts without Louis here.
Well, we could keep it going a little bit longer until
maybe I'll get it back. Yeah, it's like the middle of the day, so I'm very and the wind is fine. Why the hell did you not have power?
Yeah, there's nothing going on. Blue skies.
Yeah, exactly. Damn. It's windy. Okay. Say no more then. Where he's living, like with our buddy Luke and everything, they're like in the middle of 2 power grids. So if either of those 2 grids goes off and they lose their power, so they're always losing their fucking power. It's really convenient when he's playing Dark Souls.
Oh man, losing my power. Sometimes moments in games like just something as simple as that, like and how it ties into my gaming experiences. Can be really interesting. Like sometimes it's like, oh, you died at the power went off at a really inopportune time. Fine, but like for me, there was one time where it was like terrifying. The context. I was playing Metal Gear Solid 2. I don't know. Have you guys played Metal Gear Solid 2?
Oh yes.
Okay, so there's a very specific scene in Metal Gear Solid 2 where the game starts fucking with you, and like everything. Yeah, when the Colonel starts speaking like gibberish, basically.
Yeah.
Like, the game starts like glitch or whatever, and then it's like rock worm eats like the scissors. Like they just start saying things, and I was like, what the fuck is going on? And then the power didn't go out, but a fuse blew in my house.
Okay.
So we lost power for just like my living room where I was playing the game. So all the power in that room went out during that scene, and I was like, what?
What's happening?
Yeah, I was like, the power just didn't work in that part of the house, and I was like, okay. I'm like, the game is taking over.
Yeah, that's it. Oh god. Is that an official Louis we got back, or just a beeping? It doesn't sound.
It's haunted Louis. It's Metal Gear Solid 2.
Yeah.
It's back.
Oh my god.
Oh no.
Oh Jesus.
Anyways.
Yeah.
Louis, you there?
Yeah. Is it hear me?
Can
you guys
from beyond the veil?
Hear me? Yeah.
Yeah. If I had to make an assumption, you're talking to us via your phone's data right now? Because I don't see why your mic would just poop the bed like that. That's what I'm assuming. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it says mobile. All right, so he's on his phone, but yeah, I guess maybe reception or something.
Yeah.
Oh damn.
Have you been streaming this time, Jacob? Okay, because it wasn't working at first. Okay, then you got it fixed. Okay, so now you're on your. Yeah, right. Who the fuck? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the crafting.
All these diagrams.
Oh no, the actual. Yeah, the good stuff.
How is that even possible?
Yeah.
Toussaint. Great part of the game. In fact, I don't know, Danny. Have you played The Witcher 3?
I've started playing it, but I don't know what it is. I just can't get into The Witcher.
That's fine. I don't think everyone is made to play every game. Like some games just don't click. I get that.
For sure. I just feel like this one, and Jacob can attest to this, like, he knows the kinds of games that I play, and this, by all means, should be a game that I want to play and that I would thoroughly enjoy. But just, I don't know, whatever it is, maybe it's just the aesthetics of it all. I can't click with it.
I think it's perfectly fine, and you're not the first person I've heard who said that. Like, I think when you feel it, maybe you'll get it one day, but maybe right now it's not your thing. But the end of the Toussaint DLC, after I've played all the Witcher games, I didn't read the book, so I don't have that much of an emotional attachment as maybe Jacob. But like playing the trilogy and the last DLC, finishing the last DLC and the way they end it, ooh boy, that was some.
I shall tell you all I know.
Teary, yeah. I was gonna say you like. I felt a little choked up there, so I can only imagine how you felt. Great, like just I think it's crazy to me that I find that the bulk of The Witcher 3, the main campaign, doesn't stack up against like the DLCs in terms of location and Toussaint and story and Hearts of Stone. The story, Hearts of Stone, like as just a standalone story, oh my god!
Offered to take me on as his apprentice. Only now, yes, do I realize the honor that was.
Yeah.
Sure. No, it's nuts. I don't get it. Like I started it. I'm like I was just going through the motions. Like I'll play it to play the DLC. I had no preconceived notions of how good Hearts of Stone was. And then I played it and I was like, what the fuck is happening right now? Why is this DLC so good? Like the story was so good. The characters compelling. Like the writing, the situation.
Grandmaster quality.
Oh my god, the villain. He's one of my favorite villains in general. Of anything. It's just cool. That spoon scene. Oh, spoon scene.
I know of 5.
I'm gonna tell Danny just because like it's not like nothing really. It's just more of like a
yeah.
Bear and
yeah, it's been quite some time, so you feel free to spoil.
But it's not like it's not even really that spoilery. It's just more like him showing off how powerful he is. He's basically like God. Gontro Dim is like God, so he's very powerful person, but you don't really get to see how powerful he is. He just seems kind of omnipotent, and he just shows up everywhere. But like the first someone kind of disrespects him, I don't even remember. You're like at a restaurant or bar or something, and like this guy disrespects him. He's having soup or something. What is even the context? I just remember what he does to the guy. I don't remember.
An archaeological expedition arrived in Toussaint from Castel Gropia. They questioned my master about the elfin ruins.
So casually, he's like, hold on a second, freezes time, takes a spoon, and just slowly presses it into his eye, and he's like, alright, there we go, now what were we saying? And the guy just fucking dies.
Legend claims
yeah, and you're like, what? I'm sorry, what did you just do? How did you just do that?
If there is any truth to this, but both the scholars and the Witcher disappeared without a trace.
I've never noticed.
Oh,
I've never noticed that.
Nice.
Love that part too. Yeah. Of course he is.
I'd like to ask you about something else.
He's like satanic Rumpelstiltskin. I love him. He's so terrifying, but like very casually terrifying and very witty. So he's like he's such a good villain. I think he's just such a well-rounded villain. Yeah, I think that's something that I think people may underestimate. Like, it's so easy to fall into tropes with villains and just have like, oh, big bad wants to destroy the universe or kill everybody. Like, okay, it gets very old. Whereas in games like, I don't know, maybe God of War or Spider-Man, where the villain is a little more nuanced and the things they want are like they're not just doing it to be bad. They have an end goal that just conflicts with the hero, and it's unethical what they're doing. But there's sometimes like maybe a drop of sincerity and truth to what they want too, and it's not an easy choice to go up against them. Sir Dim is kind of chaotic. It's not like he's a force. He's not really like no.
Yeah, exactly. See, I think that's a thing, and that's something to be said about great villains in general, is that typically they're not villainous. They're not evil, bad people. They just, like I think Julian was saying, they have a different moral outlook on things, or they have different responsibilities. I just finished playing Final Fantasy 15 not too long ago, and the main villain there...
Arden?
Arden. Oh, man. Like, I felt bad for the guy. I didn't want to win by the time, it actually came to fight the final boss. I felt like what he was doing was right for the most part, and it's just so... It's nice to find the humanity in villains so that they're not just over-the-top cartoonishly evil,
Letho?
Yeah.
Is it Letho you're referring to, or you're referring to? Is there another villain in Witcher 2? Okay, so there's also the king, right? There's like the kind of king who's kind of shitty. Oh. Yeah, Ruby or Sapphire.
And wine up.
Yeah. Which I never did. Professor? I did finish it, but I really don't remember it that well. I remember seeing it. Oh boy, I definitely beat it because I remember like certain scenes, visuals of the end of the game, but like I just remember fighting the evil wizard guy at the end, and I can't remember much else, to be honest. I forget most of it. I will. I believe you. Wait, what? What the fuck? Hold on, I don't remember that. I don't remember that. So, so he's like, Oh, seems so foreign to me. I really don't remember this. That's crazy.
Sir de Perak Peranded. How the mighty fall.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't the professor the villain though? Wasn't he like the big bad? Really? But then you fight the wizard guy who is protecting the professor too, right? What the hell? Oh my god! Like, I'm remembering like a lot of time in Vizima. I remember there being like that guy, the Order of the Rose or whatever, Order of the Flame. Oh wait, unless I'm no, now I'm.
Oh, is my head ever spinning after last night?
Oh, oh my god, oh my god, yeah, wait. It is coming back a little bit. It's just that I think I'm mixing scenes up in my head with Witcher 3 because you also go to like Snow Dimension. Yes, I do remember reappearing in Palace and Vizima and there being a guy who's dead that I just fought. That like this all sounds familiar to me. Oh, but it's been a long time. Yeah, it's all kind of foreign in my head, or maybe I just didn't really care. I was just like, oh, whatever, just kill this guy. Okay. Wow. Yeah, it's crazy how much depth there is to all this, to the Witcher world. It's such a that's another well realized world, but that's not exclusive to the video games. But yeah. I still like it. Yeah, the show's fun. I mean, I didn't read the books, so I don't. Yeah, I'm sure. Like I have nothing to compare it to, so I'm not able to be like, oh, they did. Isn't there a guy called? What was his name again? I thought his name was like Rat Bag or something. Or Rat something. Rat something? I don't know. I maybe I'm mixing things up. I don't even know anymore. But I do remember there was a guy who got killed by a Doppler, and he misleads Siri or something. Wait, what? Yes. Oh, the druid is him. The guy who gets killed by his Doppler self? Yeah. He's also in Witcher 1, isn't he? Lambert and Eskel. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Witcher 2 is like an adventure elsewhere. You don't go to Kaer Morhen in Witcher 2, I don't think. 1 and 3 are in Kaer Morhen a lot, so you see a lot of the Witchers, you see Lambert and... what's his name? Oh my god. What's the older Witcher's name again? Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Have I gone absolutely cuckoo? Selling all dirt cheap?
I've been playing a lot of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and man, some of those places are actually quite nice. Yeah, honestly, good for good for them on that front that they make like so many different locations look pretty good and have a good sense of identity.
What a mincemeat.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised. My brother asked me a question recently. I was talking about Assassin's Creed, and I realized something when he asked me it, which he was like, "Oh, are there many other games that take a historical location and make you able to kind of explore it?" And I was like, "Oh, of course there must be." And then I thought about it, like outside of Assassin's Creed, yeah, what the hell? Doesn't that seem like a lost like market? Like it's just dominated by Assassin's Creed, like, who takes like every time period.
Yeah.
I just never noticed that. Ghost?
Ghost safe.
Oh, Plague Tale.
Oh.
I haven't played that. That's the French. It's in France. I don't know. Like Ghost of Tsushima does some history. Of course. And just like in Assassin's Creed, a lot of the characters might be real, but it's always pretty exaggerated what happens, and they tie in like fictional characters as well. But I still don't know many other games that like let you explore real. Like even though I was thinking Kingdom Come Deliverance, it's not a real place. So pre-World War One, I can't think of any game that uses history outside of Assassin's Creed. It uses history quite like that, where you have like an open world exploration, like of landmarks. It didn't occur to me. I figured that there's so many games out there that cover so many different genres and time periods. I figured, oh well, there must be like decent competition, even if it's just more obscure games. And then I thought about it a lot, and I was like, wait a minute, no, there really aren't. It's crazy. There's no competition there. Assassin's Creed just dominates that entire, and they could literally pick any time period, and then they're just like the ones who dominate that time period. So, how many Caribbean pirate games are as in depth as Assassin's Creed 4? How many?
Yeah, exactly.
Sea of Thieves is a kind of an artistic, fictional take on that. I don't know. yeah, or French Revolution, Italian Renaissance. Definitely not anything else that does that. Or even like being like I'm playing a lot of Valhalla now, and I'm just really thinking about how. You know what? There really isn't a lot quite like this. I mean, in terms of its gameplay, it's not like groundbreaking. Maybe it's very typical third-person action, but yeah, I guess I'm kind of impressed when I think about it. I think that Ubisoft gets a lot of flack for their games are very like they have a set formula for a lot of their games. Like there's a lot of there's like a template that they use, I guess. They have a consistency throughout all their games with currencies, tons of currencies and in-game economies, giant maps, lots of icons. These are consistent points throughout their games, but I'm impressed with some of the other things that are going on there with their worlds and the writing and the graphics. Just I skipped the whole last trilogy, and which means like I didn't really play much for Unity or Syndicate. Those are
me too.
Yeah, I played 1, 2, and 3, and Brotherhood and Revelations. Like those, I played a lot. Then Origins. Yeah, I'm probably one of the minority who really did enjoy 3. Like I thought the combat was the peak. I think for me, the peak combat 3 was just so tight and satisfying in combat. The world and main character I didn't like quite as much, but I still liked 3. 4, I think I would have liked 4, but it just... I think it was too daunting at the time. Like, I felt too overwhelmed with just how much is going on in 4. There's so much to do, and I guess that's pretty consistent throughout the rest of the series, but man, Origins felt really great, even though it was a new take on it, and I do lament the loss of the stealth a little bit, like the fact that some enemies have huge health pools. That it feels a little bogus, like in Valhalla, for example. First of all, a Viking being stealthy is a little weird on its own.
It's a little nonsense, yeah.
Yeah, like that bothers me, and then on top of that, it's so non-viable as an option, being stealthy in that game. I tried it, and I feel like the guards can, like, spot you anywhere, and there's nowhere to really hide. And if you run, it's suspicious, but if you walk slowly, they'll come and check you, so I'm like, well, I guess I'll fucking axe you in the face then. Like, you really have many other options. I'm like, well, that's what a Viking would do. I'm like, what would Eivor do? I'm like, well, he'd probably shove this axe in your face. So
yeah,
bye-bye.
exactly.
And then there's narrative consistency that kind of breaks down a little bit when you're raiding monasteries, and like you're killing these guards and you accidentally swing and hit a monk who's there, and it's and the game tells you, no, Eivor didn't kill innocent people. I'm like, yeah, I get that they want me to empathize with Eivor and not see him as a murderer, but he's also a Viking, and I highly doubt the Vikings were kindly opening the doors, like barging into monasteries and being like, all right, monks, get out of here.
All monks to one side and all soldiers to the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, if you're gonna fight me, I'll kill you. Otherwise, we are very honorable. Like, I don't know, man. And also, it doesn't help that the monks are like frantically like sprinting around the rooms.
Yeah,
you know,
through
like,
your swords. Like, oh boy, that's the best place to run.
They're just like flailing, like, oh no, it's a Viking, and I'm like, yeah, okay, just get out of my way. And a guy is poking me with a spear. I'm like, well, I swing to hit him and accidentally chop off a monk's head in the process. I'm like,
like, sorry, I'm not slowing down, buddy. So you know, yeah. It's. I feel like with that whole thing, like they have the whole Han shot first thing, where like. I agree. I feel like it should have been, you're a Viking, don't give me a penalty for killing regular people, especially not during a raid. Okay, if I'm not raiding and it's just like I'm going around, sure, you want to penalize me for killing 3 people, go for it. I get it. You want to tell your story. You don't want to make this character this horrific murderer, because then his actions does not match up to the things that happen in cutscenes and whatnot. You know, there's that disconnect. But yeah, 100% in raids, like, don't, come on. Yeah,
and it's even the people you are killing, like even those guards, they really don't deserve it. So it's not like he's up on a pedestal, like
yeah,
it's like
exactly,
yeah. Please don't rob us. And you're like, I don't care. I want to build a hairdresser at my home base, so you're gonna fucking die, mate.
Yeah, sorry.
Like, yeah. I mean, it's still fun though. I will say it is fun. Probably without Louis.
Oh yeah, I'm looking. Well, if you look at the general text, it looks like it's like a Pierrefonds wide power outage, and it's going to be back at 7. So we definitely lost Louis for the remainder of the thing for sure. But oh yeah, I mean, we got at least 2.5 hours of like solid content before it got cut, you know. So a little bit of editing here and there to take out some of the dead time, and we're good to go.